Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the Shinigami king and fell in love with both Yoruichi and Soifon? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The king is dead, long live the king. The air in the Great Spirit Palace was thin and sharp, like shattered glass. What had once been a silent, sterile testament to an absent god was now a ruin, a monum. End to a war that had torn the heavens asunder. Below, in the Seraite, the very foundations of reality felt fragile. The Gote 13 stood assembled in the captain's meeting hall, the silence between them heavier than any spoken word. The Soul King was dead, not merely slain, but utterly erased, his existence unmade, and with him, the linchpin that held the three worlds in balance. Shunsui Kyoraku, the newly appointed captain-commander, let the pink floral pattern of his kimono hang loosely over his shoulders, a splash of defiant nonchalance in a world bleached of certainty. His gaze, however, shadowed by his straw hat, was anything but casual. He scanned the faces of his captains, the stoic Byakuya Kuchiki, his jaw set like stone, the unnervingly cheerful Kenpachi Zaraki, grinning at the prospect of more chaos. The weary Toshiro Hitsugaya, who seemed to have aged a decade in the last few days. They were the most powerful beings in the Soul Society, and they were adrift. The Central 46 are in emergency session. Kyoraku's voice was low, cutting through the tension. They're debating the political and spiritual ramifications of our situation. In other words, they're panicking. Let them. Soifon, captain of the 2nd Division and commander of the Onmitsukido, snapped. Her voice was as sharp and precise as a stinger. Their role is to deliberate. Ours is to act. The situation is that the worlds are on the verge of collapsing into one another. We need a new pillar. Now. Before anyone could respond, a tremor ran through the Seraite. It wasn't the violent shaking of an earthquake, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in their very souls. The air grew thick, heavy with an impossible pressure. Raryoku, the spiritual energy that was the very fabric of their existence, arced around a single point in the center of the hall. The space there did not rip or tear. It simply unwound. A perfect circle of absolute nothingness appeared, a black so deep it seemed to drink the light. Then, just as silently, a figure stepped through. He was tall, with a bearing that was neither arrogant nor humble, but simply present. He wore a simple black shihakusho, but of a design they had never seen, and over it, a white haori that flowed like liquid shadow, its hem unfinished, as if it were still being woven from the void itself. His hair was the color of sun-bleached gold, a star. In vibrant contrast to the oppressive black of his attire. But it was his face that seized every captain's breath. Fused to the right side of his face, from his temple to his jaw, was a mask. It was bone-white porcelain, with jagged, feral lines and hollow eye sockets that seemed to stare into eternity. It was not worn. It was a part of him, seamless with his skin, a permanent, terrifying brand of death. He took another step, and the portal vanished. The atmospheric pressure snapped back to normal, but the tension in the room had changed. It was no longer the anxiety of a ship without a rudder. It was the crushing stillness of predators that had just realized a far greater hunter had entered their territory. The man's single visible eye, a blue so profound it held the depth of the ocean, swept across the assembled captains. He wasn't assessing them. He was acknowledging them, the way one might acknowledge the furniture in a room they now owned. The Shinigami is dead, he said. His voice was calm, a steady baritone that carried an echo of something ancient and absolute. It was not a pronouncement of grief, but a statement of fact. His reign is over. Kenpachi's grin widened, a feral slash of teeth. And who the hell are you to say so? The man's blue eye settled on him. There was no malice in it, no challenge. There was only an unassailable certainty. I am Naruto Uzumaki, and I am what comes next. Before another word could be spoken, the shoji doors to the hall slammed open. 24 members of the Central 46, the judicial and legislative body of the Soul Society, marched in, their white robes immaculate. Their faces masks of outrage and fear. An old man with a long, plaited beard stepped forward, his voice trembling with indignation. You, intruder, You stand on sacred ground. In the heart of the Gote 13. By the laws of the Soul Society, you will identify yourself and submit to our judgment. Naruto turned his head slowly, the porcelain mask giving his profile a monstrous, inhuman quality. He didn't answer. He simply lifted his left hand, palm open. The air around the Central 46 shimmered. The stone walls of their sacred chamber, miles away in their secluded fortress, silently dissolved into dust. The ornate ceiling, the ancient scrolls of law, the very chairs they had been sitting in moments before, all of it unmade, atomized without a sound, leaving them standing under an open sky they couldn't see. Here, in the meeting hall, nothing had happened, yet every one of the legislators felt a phantom chill, a violation so profound it stole their breath. They knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that their seat of power was gone. Naruto lowered his hand. Your laws, he said, his voice still unnervingly calm, are based on a throne that is now empty. Your power is an illusion. Do not address me again. The old man's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. The rest of the 46 were frozen, their faces pale with the sudden, terrifying realization of their own irrelevance. Soifon's hand rested on the hilt of her Zanpakuto, every muscle in her body coiled tight. This man, he hadn't used Kido. He hadn't released any detectable spiritual pressure. He had simply willed something to be, and it was. The sheer, casual arrogance of it was an insult to every principle she lived by. Kiraku, however, slowly relaxed his posture, a thoughtful, calculating look replacing the tension in his eyes. He had seen enough war to recognize a paradigm shift when it stepped into his office. Brute force would be useless here. Well now, he said, his tone deceptively light. That's quite a way to introduce yourself. Uzumaki-san, was it? Forgive the rudeness of my colleagues. We've had a rather stressful few days. Naruto's gaze shifted to the captain commander. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Kiraku Shunsui, you understand. It wasn't a question. Before Kiraku could press for more, a blur of motion and a gust of wind signaled a new arrival. A woman landed silently in the center of the hall, crouching like a cat before rising with a fluid grace. She wore a form-fitting orange and black stealth suit, and her long, purple hair was tied in a high ponytail. A wide, mischievous grin spread across her face as her golden eyes, glinting with intelligence and amusement, fixed on Naruto. My, Yoruichi Soifon purred, her voice a low, throaty sound that drew every eye. I step away for a little nap and a new king decides to move in. You certainly know how to make an entrance. She circled him slowly, her movements sinuous and predatory, showing absolutely no fear. I felt that little stunt you pulled from the Soifon manor. Very impressive. Tell me, stranger with the pretty face, half of one, anyway, what do you plan to do now that you've scared the old men speechless? Soifon bristled, her knuckles white on her sword. Yoruichi-sama, do not be reckless. This man is an unknown threat. Yoruichi waved a dismissive hand over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off Naruto. Oh, hush, Soi-chan. He's not a threat. He's a curiosity. A very, very powerful curiosity. She stopped in front of him, tilting her head. So, what's it to be? Are you going to sit on the empty throne and rule us all? Or are you just here to break things? Naruto watched her, his expression unreadable. For the first time since he'd arrived, there was a flicker of something other than absolute control in his visible eye. Interest. The old king was a seal. A cork in a bottle. He did not rule. He merely was. That is not enough anymore. He turned and began to walk toward the exit of the hall, his steps measured and deliberate. The captains parted before him, a silent, instinctual deference. The Soul Society needs a foundation, not a figurehead. He paused at the door, his back to them. I will be that foundation. With that, he was gone, his presence vanishing as completely as it had appeared. For a long moment, the hall was utterly still. Then, chaos erupted. Captains began shouting, demanding answers. The Central 46 stammered about treason and blasphemy. Soifon flashed to Kiraku's side. Captain Commander, we must act. He has declared himself a usurper. We cannot allow this. Kiraku took a slow drag from a non-existent pipe, a nervous habit. Act how? Soifon-kun. Did you sense the upper limit of his power? I certainly didn't. Did you see a weakness? An opening? All I saw was a man who unmade the Central 46's headquarters from miles away because they annoyed him. Yoruichi stretched, a lazy, feline motion. He's right, Soi-chan. Rushing him would be like a kitten trying to fight a typhoon. Besides, her grin returned, wider than before. This is far more interesting than propping up some noble family member as a replacement. She turned and vanished in a flicker of shunpo, her parting words echoing in the hall. I'm going to go get properly acquainted with our new king. Soifon watched her go, a storm of conflicting emotions warring within her. Her unwavering loyalty to Yoruichi, her rigid devotion to the law, and the chilling, undeniable power she had just witnessed. This Naruto Uzumaki Ha-D shattered a millennium of tradition in less than 5 minutes, and he had done it without breaking a sweat. He wasn't just a threat. He was an impossibility. Naruto found the throne easily. It was less a seat of power and more a focal point, a place where the ley lines of the entire spirit palace converged. It was empty, a simple, unadorned dais of white stone that now felt like a wound in the heart of the realm. He didn't sit on it. He stood before it, feeling the currents of a million souls, the faint cries of the unbalanced worlds, the whispers from the void that the old king's presence had kept at bay. He had been born in a world of chakra, of life and vibrant energy. This place was different. It was built on the echoes of life, on the silence that followed a final breath. And now, it was his. The fourth great ninja war felt like a lifetime ago. He remembered the final moments, the clash with Kagaya, the ceiling. But something had gone wrong. The Shinigami, the great specter of death he had summoned once before, had been torn from its own plane by the sheer dimensional chaos. He remembered a blinding light, an agony that was not of the body but of the soul, and a fusion. He had not just died. He had merged with the very concept of death itself, his own soul becoming the new anchor. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. He was something more, something necessary. A soft footstep behind him broke his reverie. He didn't need to turn. He had felt her approach from the moment she'd left the captain's hall. It's a bit plain for a throne, don't you think? Yoruichi's voice was playful, but her golden eyes were sharp, analytical. I'd have expected more gold. Maybe a few skulls. It isn't for sitting, Naruto replied, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. It's a fulcrum, a place to apply leverage. Leverage on what? She walked to his side, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. Reality. Yoruichi let out a low whistle. You don't start small, do you? She leaned against a nearby pillar, crossing her arms. So, Naruto Uzumaki. That's a strange name for a Shinigami. Where are you from? You don't feel like you were born here. You don't feel like you were born at all. I wasn't, he said simply. I was made. His eye met hers. In a war, much like the one you just finished. Her playful demeanor softened for a fraction of a second. You know about that. I know that the balance is broken. The worlds are screaming. That is why I am here. To quiet them. Before she could press him further, a new report, delivered by a nervous-looking member of the 2nd Division, reached Kyoraku miles below. The captain commander listened, his one good eye narrowing. He dismissed the messenger with a wave and stared out at the Seraite. Souls vanishing without a trace from the 80th district of the Rukongai, he murmured to himself. Leaving nothing behind but a fine, crystalline dust. What now? The old problems were already being replaced by new, stranger ones. Back in the throne room, Yoruichi pushed herself off the pillar. You talk a good game, Naruto Uzumaki. You've got the power to back it up, no doubt. But ruling is more than just having a heavy hand. You need the captains. You need the Gote 13. And right now, they're terrified of you. Fear is a tool, he stated, not cruelly, but pragmatically. It ensures compliance until respect can be earned. And how do you plan on earning that? Yoruichi's grin was back, full of challenge and fire. Words are cheap. The old men in the 46 love words. I prefer action. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You want to prove you're more than just a monster who broke our little world. You want to show them you're worthy of being a king. She tapped him lightly on the chest. How about a friendly spar? Right here, Right now. No Kido, no Zanpakuto releases. Just speed and fists. A little flash war. Her eyes gleamed. Let's see if the new god can keep up with the goddess of flash. Naruto was silent for a moment. He looked at the empty throne, then at the confident, powerful woman before him. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, the first sign of the man he used to be. The idea of a straightforward fight, a contest of skill and power, was a language he understood far better than politics and posturing. It was a chance to speak without words, to demonstrate, not declare. His single blue eye met her golden ones, and for the first time, it held a spark of genuine warmth. "All right," he said, "show me what you've got." Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A flash of gold and a sting of death. The silence in the throne room was a living thing. It pressed in on them, thick with the W8 of unspoken challenges and the ozone crackle of immense spiritual power held in check. Yoruichi's grin was a slash of white in the stark chamber, her golden eyes alight with a fire Naruto hadn't seen since a lifetime ago. It was the thrill of a true fight, the joy of testing one's limits against a worthy opponent. It was a language he knew intimately. Just speed and fists, she repeated. Her voice a low purr that did little to hide the steel beneath. The rules are simple. First one to land a decisive blow wins. No crying if you break a nail, Your Majesty. She settled into a low, predatory crouch. The muscles in her powerful legs coiling like springs. She was a panther ready to pounce, every line of her body screaming coiled energy and deadly intent. Naruto remained standing, his posture relaxed. Almost casual. He didn't adopt a formal stance, he simply was present. A mountain that did not need to brace for the storm because it was the storm. Decisive blow, he echoed. The corner of his mouth ticking upward in a ghost of a smile. I'll try not to overdo it. The air shattered. Yoruichi didn't move. She simply wasn't there anymore. A sonic boom ripped through the chamber. The stone floor cracking under the force of her departure. To a lesser Shinigami, she would have been a whisper of displaced air, a phantom. To Naruto, she was a comet of golden ryutsu streaking through the room. Aimed directly at his back. He didn't turn. He didn't even seem to register her attack. Just as her foot, wreathed in the compressed energy of a master's shunpo, was about to connect with his spine, he swayed. It wasn't a dodge. It was a subtle, impossible shift of space, as if reality itself had bent around him for a fraction of an inch. Yoruichi's kick passed through the space he had occupied, the force of it blasting a spiderweb of cracks across the far wall. She landed silently 50 feet away, her eyes wide with a flicker of genuine shock. It wasn't that he had dodged her. She was the goddess of flash, and no one dodged her opening move. It was how he dodged. There was no wasted motion, no flicker of his own shunpo. It was as if he'd known the precise trajectory of her attack down to the millimeter before she had even launched it. Not bad, she breathed, her grin returning, sharper this time. You're full of surprises. You moved before you thought, Naruto said, finally turning to face her. His single blue eye held a deep, analytical calm. Your speed is instinct, pure muscle memory. You rely on your opponent not being able to react. That's a mistake. Oh, and what's your instinct, King-sama? She taunted, already blurring into motion again. This time, she didn't attack directly. She became a whirlwind of motion, a golden blur that circled the chamber. Her speed creating afterimages that lingered in the air like ghostly duplicates. The sound was a continuous, high-pitched shriek as she broke the sound barrier again and again, testing his senses, looking for an opening. A flicker of an eye that would betray his focus. Naruto stood at the epicenter of the storm, perfectly still. He closed his eye. The world of light and shadow vanished, replaced by a new sense. One born of his fusion with the Shinigami. He didn't see Yoruichi's body, he felt her soul. A brilliant, blazing sun of energy, fierce and untamed, but its path was as predictable as a planet in orbit. He felt the infinitesimal spike in her spiritual pressure as she prepared to change direction, the subtle shift in intent as she committed to a strike. She appeared in front of him. A knife hand chop aimed at his neck. He caught her wrist. The impact sent a shockwave that vibrated through the very foundations of the palace. Yoruichi's eyes widened again. He hadn't just matched her speed. He had intercepted her. It was like trying to punch a lightning bolt and having the lightning bolt catch your fist. His grip was like iron, yet it wasn't crushing. It was absolute. My instinct, he said, his voice calm amidst the gale of their combined power, is to find the center of things. With a twist, Yoruichi disengaged, backflipping away and putting distance between them. She landed and began to laugh. A genuine, delighted sound that echoed in the vast room. All right, okay, I get it, she exclaimed, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. No more warm-up, you're the real deal. A dangerous glint entered her eyes. But I am Yoruichi Soifon. And you have no idea what that means. She vanished. This time, there was no sonic boom, no displaced air. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. Naruto's soul sense felt her presence fragment, scattering into a dozen points at once. It was a technique designed to overwhelm an opponent's senses, a high-level AP. Plication of Shunpo that few could even comprehend, let alone counter. He felt a presence behind him, a sharp sting of focused spiritual pressure. He pivoted, his hand coming up to block, but it was just an afterimage. Dissolving into motes of light. Another attack came from his left, a phantom feint. Then from above, she was everywhere and nowhere, a hornet's nest of attacks, each one just a probe, a test. Naruto stopped trying to track them individually. Instead, he reached out, not with his hand, but with his will. He let his own Raryoku flow outward, not as an attack, but as a field, a tranquil sea in the middle of her storm. He didn't try to stop her. He simply existed, his presence a calming, immense pressure that began to affect the very space around him. Yoruichi felt it instantly. The air grew thick, heavy, like moving through water. Her peerless speed began to drag, each step requiring more effort than the last. It wasn't a Kido spell, it was more fundamental than that. As imposing his own reality on the throne room, his stillness subtly dominating her motion. Clever, she thought, darting in for a real strike, aiming a powerful kick at his ribs. This time, he met it. He moved, a blur of white and black, and his shin connected with hers. The resulting explosion of force was deafening. A dome of pressurized air blasted outward, pulverizing the stone floor into dust and sending cracks racing up the pillars. They were locked together for a heartbeat, blue eye meeting gold, a silent conversation passing between them, one of respect, surprise, and exhilaration. They broke apart, each landing on opposite sides of the ruined throne room. Naruto felt a dull ache in his leg. She had hit him. It was a solid, powerful blow, filled with decades of honed skill. He looked at her and saw she was rubbing her own shin, a slight wince on her face. He had hit her just as hard. You're not just fast, he acknowledged, the compliment genuine. You're strong. You entrate all your power into a single point. Most people's bodies would tear themselves apart moving like that. It's called Hakuda, she said, her breathing a little faster now, the thrill of the fight making her voice tight. And you're not just a monster with a bottomless well of power. You have control, frightening control. Where did you learn to fight like that? In a world that was always on fire, he answered cryptically. Now, let me show you something. He lowered his stance, bending his knees slightly. He began to gather his energy, but not in the explosive way a Shinigami captain would for a Kido spell. He drew it inward, compressing it into his very core. The air around him began to shimmer, not with heat, but with a strange, distorting effect. The white porcelain of his mask seemed to glow with an internal light. Yoruichi's instincts screamed. This was it. This was the power she had felt when he'd first arrived, the power that had unmade the Central 46's fortress. She tensed, ready to use her ultimate technique, Shunko, a fusion of Hakuda and Kido that would wreath her body in lightning. But before she could activate it, he moved. He used Shunpo. But it was his Shunpo. He didn't just disappear and reappear. He left a trail, a deep, resonant hum that was not a sound but a vibration in the soul. He appeared before her, his fist cocked back. She met his charge, her own fist ready. Knowing this would be the final exchange. Their fists connected, and nothing happened. There was no explosion, no shockwave, no sound. For a split second, all the kinetic energy, all the catastrophic spiritual pressure, was simply gone, absorbed into the single point of impact. Then, the universe seemed to reassert itself. A wave of pure, colorless force erupted from their fists, not as an explosion, but as a silent, expanding sphere of annihilation. The remaining pillars of the throne room didn't crumble. They were unmade, turning to fine, gray dust that didn't even have time to scatter before it was erased. The walls, the ceiling, all of it vanished, leaving them standing on a barren, circular platform under the vast, alien sky of the Soul King's palace. They were thrown back, not by the force of the blow, but by the recoil of reality snapping back into place. They landed on their feet 100 yards apart, breathing heavily. Naruto stood with his fist still extended. A single, thin trickle of blood ran from his knuckles. Across from him, Yoruichi stared at her own fist, equally bruised. A draw, a perfect, absolute stalemate. Any further, and it would have ceased to be a spar. It would have become a battle for survival. She finally lowered her hand and let out a long, slow breath. The wild, challenging grin was gone, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated respect. "Okay," she said, her voice husky. "You win." "I think," Naruto replied, flexing his hand, "that we both made our point." "My point was to see if you were more than just a mindless god of destruction," she said, walking toward him, her gait tired but steady. You're a warrior, and a damn good one." "My point," he said, meeting her in the center of their self-made arena, "was to see if there was anyone in this new world who could speak my language." His blue eyes softened slightly. "You can." A comfortable silence fell between them, the shared understanding of warriors who had met their equal. It was a bond forged in a way that words never could. It was shattered by a sharp, cutting voice. "Yoruichi-sama." Soifon landed between them, a blur of black and white. Her zanpakuto was drawn, its razor-sharp edge pointed directly at Naruto's throat. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes burning with a righteous, protective fire. Behind her, 24 members of the Onmitsukido materialized from the shadows. Their weapons ready, their faces hidden behind masks. "Step away from him," Soifon commanded, her voice dangerously low. "He is an enemy of the Seraite. A usurper. You will not be corrupted by him." Yoruichi rolled her eyes, though the exhaustion from their fight was still plain on her face. "Soi-chan, put the sword away. We were just having a chat. I saw what happened." Soifon shot back, her gaze never leaving Naruto. "He destroyed the throne room. He is a force of chaos, and I will not allow him to endanger you or the Soul Society." Naruto didn't even look at the blade at his throat. His attention was entirely on Soifon. He saw past the uniform, past the anger, past the rigid adherence to duty. He saw the heart of her, and it was a tangled knot of fierce loyalty and crippling fear. "Your loyalty is admirable, Captain Soifon," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority that made even her fanatics pause. "But it is misplaced. My loyalty is to the Gote 13 and its laws," she snarled. "Laws you have spat upon." "No," Naruto said, his gaze piercing. "Your loyalty is to her." He gave a slight nod toward Yoruichi. "The laws, the Gote 13, the Soul Society, they are all just a framework you've built around that single, unwavering point. A structure to give your devotion meaning." Soifon flinched as if he had struck her. Her knuckles whitened on the hilt of her sword. "You know nothing. I know that you see me as a threat not because I broke your laws, but because she accepts me," Naruto continued, his voice softening, losing its edge of command and taking on a tone of understanding. "She engages me, challenges me, smiles at me. And in her freedom, you see a threat to your structure. You aren't afraid I'll destroy the Soul Society. You're afraid I'll take her from you." The words hit Soifon like a physical blow. The tip of her blade wavered. For a split second, the mask of the stoic captain cracked, revealing the vulnerable, insecure woman beneath. The woman who had been left behind once before and lived in mortal terror of it happening again. She saw Yoruichi's easy camaraderie with this powerful, charismatic stranger. And it felt like a dagger in her heart. "That's," she stammered, her fury faltering, replaced by a raw, painful confusion. Yoruichi stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Soifon's shoulder. "Soifon," she said softly, her voice losing all its earlier playfulness. "He's not wrong, is he?" Soifon couldn't answer. She couldn't look at Yoruichi. She could only stare at Naruto, this impossible man who had seen through her in minutes, who had dismantled her entire reason for being with a few simple, devastatingly accurate words. He hadn't fought her with his fists, but he had defeated her utterly. With a choked sound, she sheathed her Zanpakuto, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. My duty is to protect the Seraite from all threats, she said, her voice stiff, robotic, a desperate attempt to rebuild her walls. I will be watching you. She turned to leave, her movements jerky and unnatural. Wait, Naruto said. She froze, her back to him. Your devotion to her, he said. It is your greatest strength. Do not let it become a cage. Soifon said nothing. She simply vanished, her Onmitsukido melting into the shadows with her. Yoruichi sighed, a long, weary sound. Well, that was intense. You have a real talent for getting under people's skin, Your Majesty. I just say what I see, he replied. Yeah, well, some people don't like being seen that clearly, she countered. She stretched, her joints popping. Come on, I promised you a tour. And after that little workout, I could use a walk. She gave him a sly grin. Besides, now that you've demolished the main hall, we should probably find you some new quarters before Kiraku has an aneurysm. She started to walk away, leading him out of the wreckage and toward the bridges that connected the different levels of the palace. Naruto fell into step beside her. The intense energy of their fight had been replaced by a quiet, comfortable rhythm. As they walked, Yoruichi pointed out landmarks, her voice regaining its easygoing nature. She showed him the sprawling compounds of the noble families, the distant, shimmering dome of the Central 46's new, temporary headquarters, and below it all, the vast, ordered grid of the Seraite. It's a city of soldiers, Naruto observed, looking down at the uniformed Shinigami patrolling the streets. Organized, rigid, it has to be, Yoruichi said. Order is what keeps the chaos at bay. At least, that's the theory. They took a detour through a remote, overgrown training ground, one that Yoruichi said hadn't been used in centuries. It was quiet, peaceful, a pocket of wildness in the otherwise manicured palace grounds. And that's where they found them. There were 3 bodies, all clad in the standard black shihakusho of unseated officers. They weren't mutilated or wounded. They were simply still. But it was their faces that made Yoruichi draw a sharp, hiss-like breath. Growing from their skin, perfectly fused with flesh and bone, were crystalline masks, almost identical to the one Naruto wore. But different. His was bone white, a part of him. These were translucent, like quartz, and seemed to hum with a faint, discordant energy. The masks covered their entire faces, intricate, geometric patterns spreading like frost down their necks and onto their chests. What in the world's? Yoruichi whispered, her playful demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp, focused attention of a seasoned warrior. She knelt, careful not to touch the bodies. Their Shinigami, they were. Their Raryoku is gone. Drained. Hollow feet. Naruto knelt beside her. He felt it too, but it was more than just the absence of their power. There was a coldness here, a void that felt chillingly familiar. It was a faint echo of the same emptiness the old Soul King's presence had held back. He reached out a hand, hovering it over one of the crystalline masks. He could feel the faint hum, a vibration that felt hungry. It was the same energy signature he'd felt from the report Kiraku had received. The vanishing souls, the crystalline dust. This isn't hollowification, he said, his voice grim. It's something else, something new. He looked at the mask on the dead Shinigami, then thought of the mask fused to his own face. One was a symbol of his new nature, a balance of life and death. This was just consumption. An utter erasure of the soul, leaving behind only a beautiful, terrible, empty shell. A new enemy was already moving in the shadows. An enemy that seemed to be a dark reflection of him. Yoruichi looked from the dead Shinigami to Naruto, a new, serious understanding dawning in her eyes. His arrival wasn't just a political crisis. It was the beginning of something far, far bigger. Miles away, in the shadowed barracks of the 2nd Division, Soifon stood alone in her private dojo. The room was dark, the air still and cold. She had dismissed her subordinates, demanding solitude. She stood before a wooden training post, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. His words echoed in her mind, over and over. You aren't defending the Soul Society. You're defending your own fear. It was true. She knew it was true, and the knowledge was a poison, burning through her veins. Her entire life, her entire identity, had been built on the bedrock of duty and loyalty. It was a simple, clean, honorable existence. He had looked at her and seen the messy, terrified heart she kept hidden beneath it all. He saw her fear of abandonment, her desperate need for Yoruichi's approval, her jealousy. He had laid her soul bare, and she hated him for it. But there was something else, too. A feeling she couldn't name and didn't want to. When he had spoken to her, his voice had held no judgment. Only a quiet, profound understanding. He hadn't condemned her for her weakness, he had simply acknowledged it. And in that moment, she had felt seen in a way she never had before. Not as a captain, not as a tool, but as a person. It was terrifying. With a scream of rage and confusion, she struck the training post. Her fist, empowered by her Raryoku, connected with the thick wood. But instead of shattering it, the post simply crumbled. It dissolved into a fine, gray dust that sifted through her fingers and drifted to the floor, leaving nothing behind. Soifon stared at her empty hand, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't used that much power. It wasn't possible. It was as if, for a single, terrifying second, she had touched the same power he had. The power to unmake. She looked at her hand, horrified. What was happening to her? What was he doing to her world? To her. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Whispers of Manos Grande. The discovery in the old training grounds had cast a pall over the Spirit Palace. The 3 crystalline bodies had been moved to the care of the 12th Division, where Mayuri Kuretsuchi was said to be dissecting them with a glee that bordered on the sacrilegious. It did little to comfort the rest of the Seraite. Fear, cold and sharp, had begun to seep into the cracks of their broken reality. It was one thing to lose their king. It was another to face an enemy that could seemingly erase a Shinigami's very soul and leave behind a grotesque, crystalline monument. In the hastily repurposed 1st Division meeting hall, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Naruto stood before a large map of the Seraite, his gaze distant. The single blue eye saw not the ink and parchment, but the flow of souls, the spiritual lifelines of the city. Yoruichi leaned against a wall nearby, her usual playful energy replaced by watchful stillness. Hiraku sat at the head of the table, his hat pulled low, while Soifon stood rigidly in the corner, a statue of contemptuous duty. She had not spoken a word directly to Naruto since the incident in the throne room. Her reports delivered through her lieutenant. Mayuri's preliminary findings are unsettling, Hiraku said, his voice a low rumble that did little to cut the tension. He confirms your theory, Uzumaki-san. It's not hollowification. The victims' souls were not devoured, they were nullified. Disintegrated at a fundamental level. The crystals left behind are a byproduct, a kind of spiritual fossil. A calling card, Yoruichi added, her golden eyes fixed on Naruto's back. Whoever, or whatever, is doing this, wants us to see their work. Naruto traced a line on the map, a district in the Rukongai where the first reports of vanishing souls had originated. They're testing the boundaries, he said, his voice quiet. Seeing how far they can push before we push back. First the civilians, then Shinigami. It's an escalation. Soifon finally spoke, her voice clipped and cold. It is a security threat that the Onmitsukido is handling. We have increased patrols and a stab. Lish to quarantine around the affected areas. You're patching a leak in a dam that's about to burst, Naruto countered, turning to face her. His gaze wasn't accusatory, merely factual, which only seemed to infuriate her more. You're treating the symptom. The disease is still spreading. Before she could retort, a piercing wail ripped through the Seraite. It was the emergency alarm, a sound had not been heard with such urgency since the Quincy invasion. It screamed of imminent, catastrophic danger. A communications officer from the 1st Division burst into the room, his face ashen. Captain Commander, multiple Garganta. They're opening all over the sky above the Seraite. Dozens of them. Hiraku was on his feet in an instant, his lazy demeanor vanishing like smoke. All captains, to their posts. Defend the Seraite at all costs. Get me a full report on enemy numbers and classification. The room emptied in a flash of shunpo, captains vanishing to rally their divisions. Swaff. On was gone before the officer had finished his sentence. Only Naruto and Yoruichi remained with Kiraku. This is no random attack, Yoruichi said, her eyes narrowed as she looked toward the sky. The very fabric of space was being torn open. Black gashes of nothingness bled into the blue, and from them, the first lumbering shapes began to emerge. This is coordinated, an invasion. Through the windows, they could see them. Manos Grande. Not the common, mindless Jillian class that were little more than cannon fodder, but Ejukas and even a few Vastolord-level signatures. They poured from the Garganta in a terrifying, silent tide, but there was something wrong. They moved with a chilling, unnatural precision, fanning out over the city in disciplined formations. Their white masks, usually stark bone, were marred by faint, geometric lines that glittered like quartz in the sunlight. The infection has spread, Naruto stated, his voice grim. They're an army now. He looked at Kiraku. Where is the heaviest concentration? Sector 2 North, Kiraku answered, reading a report that had just appeared in his hand. Right over the 2nd Division barracks. They're targeting Soifon. Soifon felt the sky tear open above her headquarters and knew it was a deliberate insult. They were challenging her, the commander of the Onmitsukido, on her own ground. Her division assembled in seconds, a sea of black-clad warriors. Their faces grim and determined. They mock us by attacking our home. She yelled, her voice ringing with cold fury. Show them the price of such arrogance. Subdue them, for the honor of the 2nd Division. Quote, with a unified roar, they launched into the sky. Soifon was a hornet of death at their lead. She moved through the battlefield like a scalpel, her movements precise, economical, and utterly lethal. She appeared behind a towering Jillian, her blade flashing twice in a perfect cross. Naigeki Kesatsu. 2 strikes to the same spot to ensure death. The giant hollow dissolved, its mask shattering. Her division followed her example. They were the assassins and spies of the Soul Society, and they fought with a brutal efficiency that other divisions lacked. They didn't engage in flashy duels. They identified targets, eliminated them, and moved to the next. But for every Manos they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. And they were learning. Soifon dodged a Sero blast from an Ejukas. The beam of energy far faster and more focused than it should have been. She retaliated, appearing on its back and plunging her Zanpakuto into its neck. As it fell, she realized her position. The hollows hadn't been attacking randomly. They had been hurting her, using their fallen comrades to shape the battlefield, to funnel her and her elite forces into a kill box. Now, she was surrounded. 3 Ejukas, their masks glittering with crystalline corruption, formed a triangle around her, cutting off her escape routes. Below, her division was pinned down by a relentless barrage of Seros from a dozen coordinated Jillians. They were being overwhelmed. The sheer numbers, combined with this new, terrifying intelligence, were too much. Rage burned in Soifon's chest. Rage at the enemy, and a deeper, more bitter rage at herself. She had let her pride dictate her strategy. She had seen the attack as an insult to be answered, not a tactical problem to be solved. And now, her division was paying the price. She prepared to release her Shikai, the stinger-like blade of Suzumaki, ready to sell her life dearly. Just as the 3 Ejukas fired their Seros, a point-blank barrage that would have vaporized her, a figure appeared in the sky above her. He didn't use Shunpo. He simply arrived. Naruto floated there for a moment, a stark silhouette of white and black against the chaos of the battle. He looked down at the converging beams of crimson energy, at the trapped captain, at the struggling division below. He didn't raise a hand to block the attack. He didn't move to intercept it. He simply raised his voice, and it carried over the roar of battle, calm and absolute. Cease. It was not a request. It was a command issued to reality itself. And reality obeyed. The 3 Sero blasts, inches from incinerating Soifon, simply stopped. They froze in midair, 3 searing pillars of red energy held in perfect stasis. The air crackled, the laws of physics screaming in protest, but they held. Every being on the battlefield, Shinigami and Hollow alike, froze. Soifon stared, her breath caught in her throat, at the impossible sight. She was alive, trapped in a bubble of silence between her own death and a power she could not comprehend. Naruto descended slowly, landing silently on the head of the nearest frozen Sero blast as if it were solid ground. His single blue eye swept over the corrupted Ajukas. He saw the network of energy that connected them, the hive mind intelligence that flowed through the crystalline patterns on their masks. He saw the linchpin, a hulking Jillian at the back of the formation, its mask almost completely covered in the shimmering quartz. It wasn't just another soldier, it was a node, a command and control unit. He vanished from his perch on the Sero. There was no flicker of movement, no burst of speed. He was just gone from one place and present in another. He now stood before the command node Jillian, so close that his white houri brushed against its massive leg. The Jillian, its lesser mind overwhelmed by the sheer wrongness of what was happening, could only stare. Naruto raised his left hand and placed it gently on the center of the hollow's mask. "You are an echo," he said, his voice soft, almost sympathetic. "And it is time for silence." He didn't channel Raryoku. He didn't release an attack. He simply willed it. A wave of absolute nullification flowed from his palm. It was not destructive, like fire or energy. It was an unmaking. The crystalline patterns on the hollow's mask shattered first, turning to fine, glittering dust. Then the mask itself dissolved. The immense, monstrous body followed, crumbling into a cascade of gray ash that was caught by the wind and scattered into nothingness. There was no explosion, no scream, no death throes, just a quiet, complete, and terrifying erasure from existence. The moment the command node vanished, the spell was broken. The three frozen Seros dissipated into harmless motes of red light. The other hollows, their hive mind severed, devolved into chaos. Their intelligent formations broke, their coordinated attacks ceased, and they reverted to the mindless, instinct-driven beasts they were meant to be. But Naruto wasn't finished. He turned his gaze upward, to the bleeding wounds in the sky. He rose into the air until he was level with the largest Garganta. He didn't try to force it closed with Kido. He reached out and plunged his arm into the swirling black vortex, into the void between worlds. He grabbed hold of something that wasn't there. A conceptual edge of the tear in space-time. Then, he pulled. With a sound like tearing silk, a sound that echoed in their very souls, he ripped the Garganta apart. He shredded the portal, pulling its edges together and forcing them to stitch themselves shut with a final, sickening snap. He moved to the next, and the next, and the next. In less than a minute, every portal in the sky above the Seraite had been violently, permanently sealed. The invasion was over. The remaining, now mindless hollows were quickly dispatched by the Gote 13. Silence descended on the battlefield, broken on Lee by the wind whistling through the damaged buildings. Soifon stood frozen in the sky, her sword hanging limply at her side. She had been on the verge of annihilation, her division nearly broken. And this man, this usurper, had ended the entire war in moments. He hadn't just defeated the enemy, he had dismissed them. He had treated an army of intelligent Manos Grande like an inconvenience. She watched as he descended, landing softly in the main courtyard of her barracks. She couldn't bring herself to face him. The shame of her failure was a physical weight, but it was eclipsed by the sheer, humbling magnitude of his power. It wasn't just that he was strong. It was that his strength operated on a level she couldn't even begin to analyze. It was the power of a god, and she had dared to point her sword at it. The emergency meeting was reconvened an hour later. The mood was grim. The Gote 13 had won, but no one felt victorious. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and nearly overwhelmed. They had been saved, and that fact was a bitter pill for many of them to swallow. Naruto stood before them, his expression unreadable. Yoruichi was at his side, a silent, powerful show of support. This was not a random assault. Byakuya Kuchiki stated, his voice as cold and controlled as ever. They targeted the 2nd Division specifically. It was a test of our defenses. They were mapping us, Mayuri cackled, a disturbing grin on his face. The command node Jillian Uzumaki-san so neatly disassembled was recording everything. Battle tactics, spiritual pressure levels, weaknesses. It was a reconnaissance in force of the highest order. Then we must bolster our defenses, Hitsugaya argued, his young face set in determined lines. Increase patrols, reinforce the Shikanmaku. Naruto shook his head. No. All eyes turned to him. You are still thinking of this as a war of defense, he said, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded their attention. You want to build higher walls. But the enemy is not a flood, it is a plague. It is already inside. It is in Hueco Mundo, corrupting the hollows, giving them purpose. It is in the Rukongai, erasing your souls. Fighting them here is a losing battle. We would be waiting for the next attack, and the next, until we are eventually worn down and destroyed. He let the weight of his words settle in the room. Even Soifon, who had remained stonily silent, could not refute the logic. What do you propose? Kiraku asked, his visible eye narrowed in concentration. We stop fighting the fires, Naruto declared, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the captains. We go to the source. We take the fight to Hueco Mundo. A wave of shock rippled through the assembled captains. The idea was insane. The Seraite had never, in its 1,000-year history, launched a full-scale, preemptive invasion of another world. That is madness, a lesser captain exclaimed. Hueco Mundo is an endless wasteland, home to countless hollows. An army could get lost in there for centuries. And what would be the goal? Byakuya demanded. Genocide. Are you suggesting we exterminate every hollow in existence? That would upset the balance of souls catastrophically. I am not suggesting we destroy Hueco Mundo, Naruto corrected him, his voice cutting through the rising tide of objections. I am suggesting we purify it. He raised a hand, and a small, dense ball of golden energy, mixed with the dark, heavy pressure of the Shinigami, formed in his palm. It was warm, vibrant, and utterly alien to them. This corruption, this plague, it feeds on the emptiness of the hollows. On their despair and hunger. We can fight it with its opposite. Not with destruction, but with something akin to creation. We will cleanse the source of the infection and stabilize their world. It was a radical, audacious, and terrifyingly ambitious plan. Mayuri was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of studying such a phenomenon. Byakuya saw it as a reckless overreach of power, an act of hubris that could doom them all. Hitsugaya was worried about the logistics, the sheer impossibility of the task. Then Yoruichi spoke, her voice clear and decisive. He's right. She pushed herself off the wall and walked to stand beside Naruto. For centuries, we have treated Hueco Mundo as a containment zone. We go in, we cull the strong ones, and we leave. It's a strategy that has always been reactive. It's why Aizen was able to build an army there without us knowing until it was too late. This, she gestured to Naruto, is the first proactive strategy for dealing with the hollows that I have ever heard. Her golden eyes shone with conviction. Fighting them on our terms, not theirs. I support it. Her endorsement carried immense weight. Kiraku, who had been listening intently, stroked his chin. The risks were astronomical, but the alternative was waiting for an intelligent, organized army of corrupted hollows to come knocking again. He looked at Soifon. She was the one who had faced them, the one who had been saved. Her opinion mattered. She stood rigid, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. Her entire being screamed to reject this plan. It was his plan. It was chaotic, unprecedented, and a disruption of all established order. But she had seen the enemy. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they could not have won today without him. And Yoruichi supported him without hesitation. To reject his plan would be to reject Yoruichi's judgment. It would be to declare that she would rather face certain defeat under the old rules than accept a potential victory under his. Her jaw tightened. The strategic assessment is sound, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She forced herself to meet Naruto's gaze. The risk of inaction is greater than the risk of action. The second division will support the campaign. Her reluctant agreement was the final piece. With the Onmitsukido on board, the rest of the captains saw the tide turn. A path, however dangerous, was better than no path at all. Kiraku sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Very well, the captain commander declared. The Gote 13 will begin preparations for a full-scale incursion into Hueco Mundo. Uzumaki-san, this is your strategy. You will lead it. The meeting was adjourned. As the captains filed out, their minds reeling with the enormity of the task ahead, Yoruichi lingered. She held a small, black device in her hand, like a smooth, flat stone. A faint green light blinked on its surface. A little present from an old friend, she said to Naruto, her voice low. He's been monitoring the energy signatures from his shop. She pressed the light, and a tinny, familiar voice crackled from the device. Yoruichi-san, your new friend certainly doesn't believe in subtlety, does he? I've never seen a Garganta dismantled like that. Fascinating. Get to the point, Kazuki, Yoruichi said, a fond smile touching her lips. Right, to the point, Urahara Kazuki's voice continued, losing some of its cheer. I've analyzed the residual energy from the corrupted hollows. It's not just hollow Raryoku. It's mixed with something else. Something incredibly old. It feels like an absence. A void. It predates the formation of the Soul Society, maybe even the separation of the worlds. It feels like a memory of what came before. There was a pause. I'm calling it the void's echo. Be careful, Yoruichi. This isn't just a new type of hollow you're fighting. It's a ghost. The ghost of nothingness itself. The communication ended. Yoruichi looked up at Naruto, who had heard every word. He was now not just the reluctant king of a new world, but the commander of a war against an ancient, conceptual enemy. The weight on his shoulders seemed to grow, a palpable pressure that would have crushed any lesser man. But Naruto's single blue eye was clear, focused, and utterly determined. He had a target, he had a purpose, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt like he was back on solid ground. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Court of Shadows and Steel. The War Council had ended, but the battle for the Soul Society had just begun. Naruto's plan, bold and unprecedented, had been approved, but approval was not the same as acceptance. In the ancient, hallowed halls of the noble houses, W.H. Air tradition was a religion and change was heresy. His ascension was viewed not as a salvation, but as a desecration. A foreign body in the sacred circulatory system of their world. Within the serene, meticulously raked gardens of the Kuchiki Manor, the air was anything but calm. Byakuya Kuchiki, 28th head of his clan and captain of the 6th Division, knelt on a tatami mat, his posture the epitome of aristocratic grace. Across from him knelt two other figures of immense influence. Okusu Yorimoto, the ancient and wizened head of the Odoribashi clan, a family that had managed the Seraite's archives for a millennium. And Lady Chisame of the House of Rindo, a matriarch whose family controlled a significant portion of the Rukongai's spiritual resources. His proposal is an act of supreme arrogance, Lady Chisame said. Her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. To purify Haweko Mundo. He speaks as if he were a god, remaking the worlds to his whim. He is a god, Okusu corrected, his voice a dry rasp. Or something dangerously close to it. That is the problem. The Soul King was a concept, a linchpin. He did not act. He did not command. This, Naruto Uzumaki, he does. He has taken command of our military. Dismissed the Central 46, and now seeks to launch a war that could unravel the balance of souls entirely. Byakuya remained silent, his gray eyes fixed on a single, perfectly pruned bonsai tree. He had witnessed Naruto's power firsthand. He had seen him unmake a hollow army and seal the sky. He did not dispute the man's strength. He disputed his right. The Soul Society was a system built on law, order, and precedent. Naruto Uzumaki was a living embodiment of chaos, a being with no history, no lineage, and no respect for the institutions that had governed them for centuries. The Gote 13 follows him out of fear and desperation. Byakuya finally spoke, his voice low and measured, yet carrying an unshakable weight. Kiraku sees him as a necessary evil to weather the current storm. The other captains see his power and believe it is the only path to survival. They are short-sighted. And you, Kuchiki Dono? What do you see? Lady Chisame pressed. I see a mortal soul burdened with the power of a deity. Byakuya stated. It is an unstable compound. His whims today may save us, but his whims tomorrow could destroy us. Absolute power, unchecked by law and tradition, is the definition of tyranny. We cannot allow the fate of all worlds to rest on the temperament of one man. He had their full attention. This was not just a complaint, it was a call to action. A direct confrontation is suicide, Okusu cautioned. Even if every noble clan united our forces, he would erase us as easily as he did the Manos. Force is a crude instrument, Byakuya replied, a subtle, cold light entering his eyes. We have other tools. The Gotei the 13th of May have capitulated, but they are still bound by law. The captain commander serves at the pleasure of the noble houses and the Central 46. If we can prove that Uzumaki is a threat to the established order, a threat he himself has admitted to being, we can use the system against him. His plan was simple, elegant, and insidious. They would not attack Naruto. They would isolate him. They would use their immense political influence to sow dissent among the captains, to bog down his Hueco Mundo campaign in endless bureaucracy, and to pass new laws in the reconstituted Central 46 that would legally bind his power. They would build a cage of rules and regulations around the god, and once he was constrained, they would find a way to seal him, replacing him with a more suitable figurehead. A new Soul King from a proper noble bloodline. It was a quiet coup, fought not with blades, but with whispers, documents, and the crushing weight of tradition. Soifon stood in the darkness of the Onmitsukido's central intelligence chamber. The room was a nexus of shadows and whispers, where information from every corner of the Soul Society was gathered, analyzed, and acted upon. Before her, a masked agent knelt, having just delivered their report. A clandestine meeting at the Kuchiki Manor. The heads of 3 of the 4 great noble houses, discussing the Uzumaki problem. Her first instinct was a cold, familiar spark of loyalty to the system. Byakuya Kuchiki was the embodiment of the law she was sworn to uphold. He was acting to serve the order she had dedicated her life to. The intruder, Naruto, was the source of the chaos. By all rights, her duty was clear. She should support Kuchiki. She should use the Onmitsukido to help him, to provide him with the intelligence he needed to succeed. But the memory of the battlefield was still a raw, open wound in her mind. The sky filled with intelligent, merciless hollows. Her division, her family, being systematically dismantled. The bitter taste of her own impending death. And then, his voice. Cease. He hadn't just saved her. He had understood her. In the ruins of the throne room, he had looked past her anger and seen the terrified girl hiding behind the captain's howry. He had exposed her deepest insecurities not with cruelty, but with an unnerving, quiet clarity. He had given her a choice. And then, on the battlefield, he had given her a chance to live. Her duty was to the Soul Society. But what was the Soul Society? Was it the ancient laws and the noble houses who wielded them like weapons? Or was it the millions of souls, Shinigami and civilian alike, who were now facing an existential threat? Byakuya was trying to preserve the past. Naruto was trying to secure a future. Her hand clenched into a fist. Yoruichi's face flashed in her mind. Her easy acceptance of Naruto, her belief in his path. For years, Soifon had defined her loyalty to Yoruichi through the lens of duty. But what if that was wrong? What if true loyalty wasn't about blindly following the rules Yoruichi had once represented, but about embracing the difficult, chaotic present alongside her? The choice was agonizing. It was a betrayal of everything she had ever been. It was an act of insubordination against the very structure that gave her power. It was the only choice she could make. Information you have gathered is classified at the highest level, she said to the agent, her voice hard as diamond. It will not be entered into the official record. It will not be shared with any other division. It did not happen. Do you understand? Yes, Commander. The agent replied without hesitation. Dismissed. The agent melted back into the shadows. Soifon stood alone in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just committed treason. Now, she had to go warn a king. Naruto was in the newly designated strategy chamber, a vast library that Yoruichi had donated from a forgotten wing of her family's estate. He stood over a vast, 3-dimensional map of Hueco Mundo projected by a Kido device, its endless white desert shimmering in the low light. Yoruichi was perched on a stack of ancient scrolls, munching on a rice cracker, offering occasional, insightful comments on the political leanings of the captains he would need to win over. Kenpachi doesn't care about the plan. He just wants to fight the strongest thing you can point him at, she was saying. Mayuri will do anything you ask as long as you promise him new toys to play with. Byakuya, though, he's your real problem. He doesn't see a savior, he sees a barbarian at the gates. As if on cue, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Soifon appeared at the entrance, her presence a tight, controlled knot of spiritual pressure. She did not look at Yoruichi. Her eyes were fixed solely on Naruto. "I must speak with you," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Alone?" Yoruichi raised an eyebrow but hopped off her perch with a graceful shrug. "All right, Soi-chan. Don't have too much fun without me." She gave Naruto a wink as she passed him, then vanished. The silence that remained was heavy, charged. Soifon walked forward until she stood a respectful 10 feet from him. She still did not meet his eye, her gaze fixed on a point on his chest. "I have come to report a threat to your command," she said, her tone formal. As if she were delivering a standard field report, she laid out the details of Byakuya's plan with a cold, detached precision. The meeting, the clans involved, the strategy of political and legal entrapment. She omitted nothing, including her own internal conflict and the reasons for her decision. It was a confession as much as it was a warning. When she finished, she fell silent, bracing herself. She had betrayed her class, her captaincy, her entire history. She had placed her fate in the hands of this man, this outsider. Naruto listened without interruption. When she was done, he didn't move. He simply watched her, his single blue eye holding a depth she couldn't fathom. "You chose a person over a principle," he said, his voice quiet. "That is a difficult choice. A dangerous one. My duty is to ensure the stability of the Soul Society," she replied, the words stiff. "Your plan is our best chance for survival. Theirs is a path to stagnation and defeat. My decision was tactical." A faint smile touched Naruto's lips. It was the first time she had seen it directed at her, and it was a strangely disarming sight. "Keep telling yourself that, Captain Soifon." He took a step toward her. "Thank you. Not for the information. For the choice." He didn't praise her. He didn't question her. He simply acknowledged the immense personal cost of her actions, and in doing so, he gave her something she didn't even know she needed: validation. Her rigid posture softened by a fraction. For the first time, she met his gaze. Before she could respond, 2 more figures appeared in the room. Yoruichi returned, a knowing smirk on her face, and at her side was Kyoraku, his expression uncharacteristically grim. "So," the captain commander said, tipping his hat. Quote, "It seems the old guard is getting restless. What's our move, Your Majesty?" He wasn't being sarcastic. It was a genuine question. The Gote 13 was caught between its new leader and its old masters. "Their crime is not treason," Naruto said, turning back to the map. "It is fear. We will not answer it with force." He looked at Yoruichi, then at Soifon. "We will answer it with clarity." His gaze held them both. "Come with me." The meeting of the noble clans was taking place in a secluded hall within the Central 46 compound, a place of immense historical and legal significance. It was a power play, a deliberate choice of venue to lend their conspiracy the weight of legitimacy. Byakuya was in the middle of outlining the final stages of his legal strategy when the ornate doors at the end of the hall slid open. Naruto walked in. He was not flanked by guards or captains in a show of force. He was flanked only by Yoruichi and Soifon. Yoruichi, the rogue princess of the Shihoin, and Soifon, the ultimate enforcer of the law. The symbolism was potent. Chaos and order, walking in lockstep with their new king. Every noble in the room froze. Their conspiracy had been laid bare. Guards moved to draw their blades, but a single, cold glance from Byakuya stopped them. This would not be decided by swords. "Uzumaki," Byakuya said, his voice a sheet of ice. "This is a private assembly of the noble houses. You are not welcome here. Your houses are a part of the Soul Society," Naruto replied, his voice calm as he, Yoruichi, and Soifon advanced into the center of the hall. "And I am its foundation now. Your private matters are my public concerns." "You are a usurper," Lady Chisame hissed, her face contorted with fury. "A monster who has seized power you have no right to." "Right." Naruto stopped, his gaze sweeping over them. It was not a gaze of anger, but of a profound, almost weary understanding. "Your right is based on bloodlines, on names written in books centuries ago. My right is based on the reality of this moment. There is a war coming, not for territory or honor, but for existence itself. Your traditions, your laws, your precious balance, they are a house of paper in a hurricane. I am the stone that will anchor it. Your power is the hurricane." Byakuya shot back, rising to his feet, his hand resting on the hilt of Senbon Sakura. It is absolute and arbitrary. We seek to place it under the control of law. For the good of all. You seek to put a leash on a typhoon, Naruto said. I admire the ambition. But you are trying to solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's tools. He took one more step. And the spiritual pressure in the room became immense, a crushing weight that forced every noble, save Byakuya, to their knees. It was not an attack. It was merely the passive effect of his focus. I am not here to destroy your traditions. I am here to ensure there is a world left for them to exist in. You have a choice, all of you. His blue eyes seemed to glow with a soft, internal light. You can stand with me, and we will face the coming storm together. The noble houses will be the bedrock of the new order we build from the ashes. Or, you can stand against me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We will not bow to a tyrant, Byakuya declared, his voice strained but unbroken. He was ready to die for his principles. I am not asking you to bow, Naruto said softly. And then, he did something no one expected. He reached out with his power, but not to destroy. He touched their minds. It wasn't a crude psychic assault. It was a gentle, irresistible current. He didn't erase their memories. He simply edited their perspective. He made them feel what he felt. The screaming of the unbalanced worlds, the cold, hungry touch of the void's echo, the sheer, crushing weight of his responsibility. He didn't show them his memories, he shared his senses. For a fleeting second, they felt the burden of being the sole king. And then, he subtly altered their own memories of the last hour. Their brilliant, righteous plan of legal entrapment suddenly seemed foolish, petulant, and dangerously short-sighted. Their conviction wavered, the logic of their conspiracy crumbling not from an external force, but from within their own minds. They were still themselves, but their certainty was gone, replaced by a profound and unsettling doubt. They would remember their meeting not as a failed coup, but as a grave miscalculation that they themselves had realized and abandoned, humbled by the gravity of the situation Naruto had shown them. The pressure vanished. The nobles gasped, staggering as if waking from a dream. They looked at their own hands, at each other, their faces etched with confusion and a dawning, horrifying sense of their own folly. Byakuya stumbled back a step, his hand falling from his sword. He didn't know what had just happened. He only knew that his righteous anger had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, stark understanding. He had been wrong. Terribly, dangerously wrong. I offer the choice only once, Naruto said, his voice bringing them all back to the present. He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate confidence. The war effort requires resources. I expect the full cooperation of the noble houses. Do we have an understanding? There was a stunned silence. Then, one by one, the nobles, including Lady Chisame and Okusu, bowed their heads. Not in terror, but in a new, grudging, and utterly bewildered respect. Byakuya Kuchiki, for the first time in his adult life, inclined his head in deference. You do. Later that night, the three of them sat in Yoruichi's private chambers. The room was a chaotic, comfortable mix of priceless artifacts and discarded training gear. A soft lantern cast warm shadows on the walls. Yoruichi had produced a bottle of impossibly old sake, pouring 3 cups. Naruto took one, the silence between them comfortable. He had won. He had faced down a political rebellion and dismantled it without a single casualty, turning his most powerful internal opponents into allies. Soifon stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit Seraite. She had watched him confront the nobles, had felt the subtle, terrifying shift in their spirits. It was a power more frightening than any Sero or Zanpakuto. It was the power to reshape the soul. What you did today, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was merciful, and it was terrifying. They weren't my enemies, Naruto said, swirling the sake in his cup. They were just in the way. Removing them would have been a waste. Realigning them was more efficient. Yoruichi laughed, a low, throaty sound. You say that like you were tuning an instrument. You just reprogrammed the entire aristocracy, Naruto. She took a sip of her sake, her golden eyes glittering at him over the rim of the cup. And you know what? They deserved it. She looked at Soifon's back, her expression softening. You did good today, Soifon. That was a hard choice. I'm proud of you. Soifon's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. It was the praise she had craved for a century, and now that she had it, she didn't know what to do with it. Naruto rose and walked to stand beside her at the window. He didn't speak for a long moment. "You don't have to choose between your duty and your heart," he said quietly, his gaze on the city below. "Your duty is to protect this world. Your heart is your reason for doing it. They are not in conflict." He held out his cup of sake to her. A peace offering, an invitation. She looked from the cup to his face. The porcelain mask seemed less monstrous in the soft light, the single blue eye holding only a quiet sincerity. She slowly, hesitantly, reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed against his, a fleeting, electric touch. Yoruichi watched them, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. This was new. This was interesting. This was a beginning. The three of them stood there in the quiet room. A king who carried the weight of worlds, and the two strongest women at his side, sharing a silent drink as they prepared for the war to come. The bonds between them, forged in combat, politics, and a shared, uncertain future, were beginning to form something stronger, something more profound, than any of them could have anticipated. Just before dawn, a report found its way to Soifon's desk. It was from the surveillance team stationed at the edge of the quarantined Rukongai district. It contained only 2 sentences. "The crystalline structure has grown. Faint pulses of light are now visible within it, like a slow, steady heartbeat." The quiet moment was over. The other enemy was waking up. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten War. The journey to Hueco Mundo was not a grand procession. There was no army, no fanfare. It was a scalpel strike, not a bludgeon. Naruto, Yoruichi, and Soifon led a small vanguard of less than 24 hand-picked specialists, a few Kido experts from the 4th Division, a handful of trackers from the Onmitsu Kido, and, to everyone's surprise, Akaku Madarame and Yumichika Yasugawa from the 11th, who Kenpachi had insisted, "Go play," because he was bored. Naruto tore open the Garganta himself, not with the violent ripping he'd used to seal the others, but with a precise, controlled incision in the fabric of reality. Stepping through was like plunging into a cold, sterile sea. The air in Hueco Mundo was dead. It was thin and static, carrying no scent, no moisture, only the faint, oppressive weight of endless despair. Above, a bone-white moon hung in a perpetually black sky. Its light casting no warmth, only stark, unforgiving shadows across an endless desert of white sand. "Charming place," Yoruichi remarked, her usual vibrancy feeling slightly muted in the oppressive atmosphere. "No wonder the locals are so grumpy." Soifon, ever the professional, was already issuing orders, her masked agents fanning out to establish a secure perimeter. "Atmosphere is breathable. Reishi composition is high but unstable. Maintain vigilance." Naruto ignored the sand, the sky, the oppressive silence. He was listening to something else. A hum, far below the range of normal hearing. It was the void's echo Urahara had warned them about, and to Naruto's senses, it was not an echo. It was a fundamental frequency of the desert itself, a cold spot in the spiritual world. A place where the universe was thinner. "This way," he said, pointing not toward the distant, jagged silhouette of Las Noches, but in the opposite direction, toward a vast, feet-ureless expanse of desert that even the most ancient maps marked as the empty. For hours they traveled, the landscape unchanging. The white sand stretched to every horizon, a monochrome world of blinding light and absolute shadow. The Shinigami followed without question, their trust in his power overriding the unease of journeying into nothingness. Yoruichi moved with a restless, feline grace, while Soifon maintained a perfect, disciplined pace, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. It was Naruto who noticed the change first. A subtle shift in the texture of the sand beneath his feet. It was becoming harder, more compacted. Soon, flecks of black began to appear, like obsidian dust mixed with the white. The further they went, the darker the ground became, until they were no longer walking on sand, but on a field of smooth, black, volcanic glass that stretched to the new horizon. The air grew colder, the oppressive silence deepening until it felt like a physical pressure against their ears. In the center of this impossible glass plain, a structure rose to meet the moonless sky. It wasn't a castle or a fortress. It didn't look built at all. It was a jagged, crystalline growth, a cancer of black stone that seemed to defy geometry. Angles were sharp where they should be soft, curves twisted in ways that made the eyes water. It absorbed the moonlight, giving off no reflection. A wound of absolute blackness in the heart of the desert. It felt ancient, older than the sand, older than the hollows, older than the Shinigami. What in the name of the old king is that? Akaku breathed, his usual bravado replaced by a raw awe. The source, Naruto said, his voice grim. This was where the hum was coming from. This was the heart of the plague. They approached with caution, but there were no guards, no traps. No hollows. The only thing that greeted them was a profound, unnerving silence. An archway, a perfect, seamless oval, led into the structure's interior. As they passed through it, the oppressive atmosphere of Hueco Mundo vanished, replaced by something far stranger. The air inside was still, perfectly neutral. The walls were made of the same black, light-absorbing crystal, but here and there, faint. Milky nebulae of light swirled deep within their polished surfaces. The path led them downward, into the heart of the structure, until they emerged into a vast, spherical chamber. And here, they stopped. Breathless. The walls of this chamber were alive. Within their crystalline depths, images moved and swirled, silent, ghostly tableaus playing out in an endless loop. It was a library of memories. A visual history of a forgotten age. And it told a terrifying story. They saw a world not of white sand, but of shimmering, ethereal light, inhabited by beings of pure energy, formless and radiant. Then, they saw the coming of the enemy. It wasn't an army. It was a tide of nothing. A creeping, formless, all-consuming void that unmade the light, that erased existence itself. It was the whispering void. The sleeper in the quiet dark, in its primordial, unchained form. The images shifted. They saw the beings of light fighting back, their own energy useless against the tide of non-existence. In a desperate, final act, they began to perform a terrible alchemy. They captured fragments of the void, wrapping them in cocoons of their own spiritual matter, giving the nothingness a form, a mask, a hunger. They were creating cages of flesh and spirit to contain an enemy they could not defeat. They were creating the first Manos Grande. The hollows hadn't been born of sin or hunger. They were living prisons, created as a last, desperate defense against an enemy that threatened to unmake everything. Soifon stared, her rigid understanding of the world shattering. All this time, we've been killing jailers. And every time a hollow is truly destroyed, Yoruichi whispered, her mind racing, a tiny piece of that nothing is set free. As they struggled to process the cataclysmic revelation, a new light began to coalesce in the center of the chamber. It did not flicker into existence, it assembled itself, geometric shapes of hard light and crystalline facets, locking together with mathematical precision until they formed a humanoid figure. It was tall, slender, and perfectly symmetrical. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless surface that glowed with a soft, white light. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly inhuman. It was not a hollow, nor a Shinigami. It was something else entirely. Its voice echoed in the chamber, not through sound waves, but as a direct impression upon their minds. It was a chorus of pure, harmonious tones, devoid of all emotion. Greetings, anomalies. The being radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated order. It felt like a law of physics had gained sentience. What are you? Naruto demanded, stepping forward, placing himself between the entity and his companions. I am a sentinel, a servitor of the celestial adjudicator, Metatron. My designation is Logos. My purpose is to observe and report on violations of universal law. The sentinel's featureless face turned toward Naruto. You are the primary violation. The air grew heavy. I am the Soul King. Naruto stated, his voice firm. Incorrect, the sentinel replied, its tone unwavering. The previous Soul King was a state of being. A passive constant. You are a paradox. A mortal soul, a vessel of transient will and emotion, has fused with the conceptual absolute of death. Life and finality cannot occupy the same vessel. It is a contradiction. The universe does not permit such errors. The confrontation had begun. It was not a battle of spiritual pressure, but of ideology. Logos wasn't trying to kill him. It was trying to disprove him. Your existence creates ripples, Logos continued. Its light pulsing gently. It destabilizes established realities. It turned its head toward Yoruichi. Shihoin Yoruichi. You were an agent of chaos, of freedom, of unpredictability. Your new king, by his very nature, imposes an absolute, final order, the order of death. In serving him, you serve the eventual annihilation of the very chaos you embody. Your loyalty is illogical. It then focused on Soifon. Captain Soifon, you were an agent of order, of law, of unwavering structure. Your new king is a being born of chaos, a foreign element introduced into your system, shattering a millennium of tradition. In serving him, you serve the destruction of the very order you were sworn to protect. Your loyalty is illogical. Its logic was a weapon, sharp and precise, designed to sever the bonds of trust between them. To isolate Naruto by proving his existence was fundamentally incompatible with his allies' core beliefs. Soifon and Yoruichi both flinched, the undeniable truth in the Sentinel's words striking a deep, uncomfortable chord. The contradiction must be resolved, Logos concluded. Your existence is an error. Surrender yourself for nullification. Naruto was silent for a long moment. He looked at the concerned faces of his companions, then back at the perfect, logical being before him. He knew he couldn't win this argument with its own rules. Trying to out-logic a being named Logos was a fool's errand. So, he threw the rulebook away. You're right, he said, the words stunning everyone, including the Sentinel. It is illogical. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't release his power. He simply reached out and gently took Soifon's wrist. Her eyes went wide, but she didn't pull away. He then extended his other hand to Yoruichi, who, after a moment's hesitation, took it, her fingers wrapping around his. Was it logical for a division of assassins to hold a defensive line against an army they couldn't possibly defeat? He asked, his gaze locked on the Sentinel. Quote, was it logical for them to throw their lives away to buy a few more seconds for their comrades? No, it was a tactical nightmare. But they did it. His gaze shifted to Soifon, who was staring at their joined hands. Her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Was it logical for you, Captain, to betray your class, your laws, and your entire history to warn a man you despise? No, it was treason, a flagrant violation of your own rigid code. But you did it. Finally, he looked at Yoruichi, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. And you, is it logical for the freest spirit in the soul Sosi, to bind herself to the embodiment of a new, absolute order? Of course not. It's a cage. But you're here. He turned his full attention back to Logos, the three of them now a united front. You're right. We are a collection of paradoxes. But you've made a fundamental miscalculation. You think the universe is built on logic. It isn't. It's built on meaning. Sacrifice isn't logical. Love isn't logical. Loyalty in the face of certain death is the most illogical thing in the world. He squeezed their hands gently. And that is why we will win. Because our contradictions, our illogical choices, they make us strong. You're perfect. Sterile logic. It has no heart. It has no reason to fight. He had introduced a variable that the Sentinel's system was not designed to handle, the concept of value outside of logic. He wasn't defending his right to exist based on cosmic law. He was defending it based on the personal, irrational, and unbreakable bonds he had forged. The Sentinel's light began to flicker erratically. Its harmonious voice fractured, becoming discordant. Illogical axiom detected. Value cannot be quantified. Paradox, paradox. Cracks of dark energy, like static, began to race across its crystalline body. It was overloading, its perfect system unable to compute a reality where a logical flaw could be a source of strength. Your illogical nature has been recorded, it stuttered, its form beginning to destabilize. Metatron's judgment is not a debate. It is a conclusion. The adjudicator will correct this anomaly. The light in the chamber intensified as the Sentinel's body began to break apart. The correction is necessary. It broadcast, its final thoughts a desperate warning. Your chaotic existence resonates with the sleeper in the quiet dark. You were ringing the dinner bell for the end of all things. With a final, silent implosion of light, Logos was gone. The chamber returned to its previous, heavy silence, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Yoruichi, Soifon, and Naruto stood there. Their hands still joined. The revelations of the past hour washed over them. The true nature of the hollows. The existence of a cosmic entity of absolute order that wanted Naruto erased. and the confirmation that his very presence was aggravating the primordial chaos that was waking up back in the Soul Society. They were caught between a god who saw him as a disease, and a slumbering void that saw him as a feast. Soifon slowly pulled her hand back, her face a mask of turmoil. Yoruichi let go as well, but her expression was different. It was sharp, focused, the look of a strategist who had just seen the whole board for the first time. "Well," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This has been an absolutely terrifyingly educational field trip." Naruto looked at the silent, moving images on the wall, the story of a forgotten war, a forgotten sacrifice. He now understood. He was not the beginning of a new war. He was just the next soldier in a very, very old one. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The First Seal. They returned to a Seraite that was blissfully unaware of the cataclysmic truths they had unearthed. To the Gote 13, their mission was a reconnaissance, a first step. To Naruto, Yoruichi, and Soifon, it was like returning from a different universe, burdened with a history that reshaped their entire understanding of their world. The white sands of Hawako Mundo were gone, but the cold, thin echo of the void seemed to cling to them. Kiraku listened to their report in his private office, the only other person present being his lieutenant, Nanao Eyes. He took off his straw hat, a rare gesture of gravity, and rubbed his weary, unshaven jaw as they spoke. He didn't interrupt, his gaze shifting between the three of them as they recounted the story written in the crystalline walls. The encounter with the Sentinel, and the dual cosmic threats of Metatron and the Whispering Void. When they finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Nanao's face was pale, her usual stoicism shattered by the sheer, terrifying scale of their predicament. Kiraku, however, let out a long, slow sigh and put his hat back on. "Well now," he said, his voice deceptively light, though his eye held a new, grim depth. "So, to summarize, the things we've been killing for 1,000 years are actually living prisons for a cosmic nothingness that wants to eat reality. And there's a celestial god of logic who thinks our new king is a software bug that needs to be deleted, a process which may or may not be waking up the aforementioned cosmic nothingness." He paused, looking at them. "Did I miss anything? A plague of locusts, perhaps? The dead rising from their graves?" "That's the gist of it," Yoruichi confirmed, her arms crossed. Her usual playful demeanor was a thin veneer over a sharp, calculating focus. Metatron's Sentinel logos made it clear. This isn't a war for territory. It's a war for the right to exist. And Metatron has already judged us, Soifon added, her voice tight. She had been quiet for most of the journey back, processing the fact that her life's work, the clean, honorable duty of purifying hollows, was built on a terrible, necessary lie. "It will act. We need to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Kiraku asked, the question hanging in the air. "How do you prepare for an enemy who can attack with logic? An enemy who exists on a plane above our own. It's like trying to build a fortress to keep out the concept of mathematics." Before anyone could answer, it began. It wasn't a sound or a tremor. It was a change in the quality of the light. A subtle shift in the very air of the Seraite. A faint, geometric pattern, like a shimmering, hexagonal net, flickered across the sky for a single, silent instant, visible only to those with the highest spiritual awareness. Then, it was gone. But something was left in its wake. A feeling of profound stillness. A sense of finality. A panicked pounding on the office door preceded a member of the 4th Division bursting in. His face frantic. "Captain Commander, it's the main infirmary. All of it. Something's wrong." They were there in an instant, a blur of shunpo. The scene at the 4th Division headquarters was one of quiet, ordered panic. The vast halls, usually bustling with the soft green glow of healing Kido, were dark. Wounded Shinigami from the hollow invasion lay on their cots, their injuries no longer being treated. Healers stood over them, their hands outstretched, chanting incantations that produced no effect, their faces etched with confusion and a rising tide of fear. Captain Retsu Unohana stood in the center of the chaos, her expression a mask of serene, terrifying calm. She held her hand over a gravely injured officer, a faint stream of her own Raryoku flowing from her palm. But it wasn't forming a healing spell. It was just raw energy, dissipating into the air, useless. "It is not just Kido," she said as Kiraku's group arrived, her voice dangerously soft. It is the very principle of it. The laws that govern the interaction of a soul with itself have been suspended. Yoruichi's eyes widened as the horrifying simplicity of the attack became clear. He didn't attack the healers. He attacked healing. Soifon drew her Zanpakuto, a reflex born of a lifetime of training. She focused her will, her spirit. Shikai, Suzumaki. Nothing happened. The blade remained a simple wakizashi. Her connection to her sword's spirit, a bond forged over decades, was still there, but the pathway to its power was severed. It was like a key turning in a lock that was no longer connected to a door. She stared at the inert blade in her hand, a flicker of pure, cold fear in her eyes. It wasn't just Kido. A seal of logic, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. He could feel it, a dome of perfect, crystalline law that had been superimposed over this entire sector of the Seraite. It was Metatron's first move, a demonstration of power so subtle and so absolute it was breathtaking. He hadn't sent an army. He had sent an axiom. A sword is a piece of sharpened metal. Words are vibrations in the air. A soul is a contained unit of energy. There is nothing more. Within this dome, there was no room for the miracles of the Shinigami. There was only cold, hard, mundane fact. He's crippling us, Kiraku breathed, the full tactical genius of the attack hitting him. Not with force, but by turning our own world against us. He starts with the healers, to ensure our losses are permanent. Then what? The food stores, the water supply. Naruto turned and began to walk toward the center of the affected area. The epicenter of the infirmary. Yoruichi grabbed his arm. What are you doing? You heard what Unohana said. Your power might not work in there. My power isn't like yours, Naruto said, his blue eye burning with a cold fire. It isn't a tool I wield. It's what I am. He looked at her, then at Soifon. Metatron thinks he can defeat me with logic. I'm going to show him just how flawed his reasoning is. He stepped past the invisible boundary, into the heart of the seal. The effect was immediate. He felt a profound weight, a pressure not on his body, but on his very concept of self. It was the crushing force of absolute certainty, a reality so rigid it left no room for paradox or potential. He felt the Shinigami half of his being quieted, its rules and abilities nullified. But the other half, the chaotic, stubborn, vibrant soul of Naruto Uzumaki, raged against the cage. He walked to the center of the main hall, standing amongst the wounded and the helpless healers. He could see the seal now, not with his eyes, but with his soul sense. It was a perfect, beautiful, shimmering sphere of pure law, its energy flowing in flawless, predictable patterns. It had no weakness, no seam, no flaw. It was a perfect argument with no counter. So he wasn't going to argue. He was going to make a statement. He closed his eye, shutting out the world. He thought of his conversation with Logos. He thought of the illogical, irrational, beautiful bonds he had begun to form in this strange, new world. He thought of Yoruichi's fierce, challenging grin, the fire eye. And her golden eyes that dared him to be more. He thought of Soifon's rigid, conflicted loyalty, the deep, unwavering strength she hid beneath her fear. He thought of the Gote 13, a collection of Rs and protectors who were now looking to him for answers. He loved them, not in the simple, romantic sense, though that was a part of it, budding and new. He loved them in the way he had loved his friends back home. His bond with them, his desire to protect them, was not a strategic decision. It was a selfish, desperate need. He could not, would not, exist in a world without them. He found the core of the illogical truth he had thrown at Logos, and he gave it form. Selfless sacrifice for a selfish love. It was the ultimate paradox. An act of pure altruism driven by the most selfish desire of all, the desire not to be alone. It was the core of his entire existence. And it was a concept so fundamentally flawed, so beautifully contradictory, that Metatron's perfect, logical seal could not compute it. He didn't try to attack the seal with his power. That would be like trying to punch a mathematical formula. Instead, he opened himself to it. He dropped all his defenses and willingly, completely, submitted his own soul to the seal's crushing, nullifying logic. He offered his own paradoxical existence as a sacrifice. If you want to erase the flaw, he whispered to the empty air, then here I am. For a horrifying second, it worked. The seal descended upon him, its flawless logic beginning to unmake the contradictions within his soul. Yoruichi and Soifon cried out, watching in terror as his form began to flicker. His spiritual pressure plummeting, he was letting it kill him. But a paradox cannot be resolved by the system it defies. It can only break the system. Naruto's soul, the impossible fusion of mortal life and absolute death, of selfish love and selfless action, became a virus in the seal's perfect code. His chaotic, warm, golden energy, the energy of life and will, oozed into the crystalline structure of the law. Cracks began to form, not of force, but of conceptual failure. The seal was designed to nullify anything that broke its rules, but it had no protocol or something that willingly embraced nullification for a reason that was, by its own definition, impossible. The cracks spread, a web of golden light spidering through the invisible dome. The perfect, harmonious hum of the seal fractured, becoming a discordant shriek. The rigid laws began to crumble. Then, with a sound like a single, perfect crystal bell chiming once throughout the seraite, the seal shattered. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of warmth washed over the 4th Division barracks. The green glow of healing Kido flared back to life, brighter than before. Soifon felt the familiar, eager stir of Suzubaki's spirit in her mind. The oppressive weight was gone, the natural laws of the soul society snapping back into place like a stretched rubber band. Naruto fell to one knee, gasping. The backlash of the seal's collapse washing over him. He was drained, his energy spent not in a great battle, but in a single, silent act of conceptual warfare. He had won, but it had taken a tremendous toll. Yoruichi and Soifon were at his side in a flash. "You absolute, reckless, magnificent idiot," Yoruichi hissed, her hands hovering over him, unsure if she should help him up or hit him. Relief and fury warred on her face. Soifon said nothing. She knelt beside him, her expression a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to name. She had just watched him offer himself up for erasure to save them all. She reached out, her hand hesitating for a moment before she placed it firmly on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture of support, but for her, it was a seismic shift. It was an admission, an acceptance. He looked up, first at Yoruichi's fierce, worried face, then at Soifon's conflicted, searching eyes. He gave them a tired, ragged smile. See, illogical. They half-carried, half-supported him back to his new quarters. A quiet, spacious suite that had once belonged to the old Soul King's personal guard. They dismissed the concerned attendants, barring the door. The adrenaline of the victory had faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a raw, shared vulnerability. Naruto sank onto a low couch, the white haori pooling around him. Yoruichi immediately began bustling around, finding a flask of water and a clean cloth, her practical nature taking over. Soifon remained by the door, a silent, uncertain sentinel. "That was the stupidest, most brilliant thing I have ever seen," Yoruichi said, returning and dabbing the cool cloth on his forehead. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. "You could have been erased, wiped from existence like a bad memory. It was the only way," he said, his voice raspy. "It wasn't a fortress to be broken. It was an argument to be won. I had to prove my point." "Your point," Soifon finally spoke, her voice sharp, but lacking its usual icy edge. "What was your point?" He looked past Yoruichi, his gaze meeting Soifon's across the room. "That a selfless act is never pure. We sacrifice ourselves for what we selfishly cannot bear to lose." His eye held hers, then shifted to Yoruichi. "That was my confession. I did it for myself. Because a world without you in it isn't a world I want to exist in. That's the truth of it. That's the paradox that Metatron will never understand." Quote. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, and devastatingly honest. He had stripped away all pretense, all politics, all talk of duty and kingship. He had laid his heart bare. Yoruichi's hand stilled on his forehead. Her breath hitched. The witty retort, the playful taunt, all of it died on her lips. She saw him then, not as a king, not as a god, but as a man. Terrifyingly powerful and achingly lonely, who had just gambled his entire existence on them. Soifon felt the wall she had so carefully constructed around her heart finally crumble into dust. He wasn't trying to take Yoruichi from her. He wasn't trying to corrupt her. He was trying to protect them both, because he cared for them both. His confession wasn't just for Yoruichi, it was for her, too. He had seen her, validated her. And now, he had included her in the small circle of people he would unmake reality for. Slowly, she walked from the door and knelt on the other side of him, taking the water flask from Yoruichi's stunned hand. She held it to his lips. "Drink," she commanded, her voice soft, unsteady. He drank, his eye never leaving hers. A silent understanding passed between them. A truce born of shared peril and a shocking, unexpected tenderness. Yoruichi looked at the scene, at the man who carried the weight of a god leaning on them, and at the stoic, rigid captain gently offering him water, and a slow, warm smile touched her lips. This was real, this strange, impossible trinity. It wasn't a strategic alliance or a political necessity. It was a bond, forged in the fires of a cosmic war. She settled onto the couch beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder, her energy a comforting, vibrant warmth. "Well," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely let herself feel. "I guess we're just going to have to make sure it's a world worth staying in, then." The three of them stayed like that for a long time as the Seraite returned to a state of watchful peace. A king, a knight, and a queen, finding a quiet moment of solace in the eye of a hurricane. Miles away, in the darkest, most desolate corner of the 80th Rukongai district, alone on Mitsukid. Agent watched the crystalline structure from a safe distance. For days, it had pulsed with a slow, faint, internal light. But now, something was different. As the shattered remnants of Metatrons say, all of logic dissipated into the atmosphere, the pure, celestial energy did not simply vanish. It was drawn, pulled by an invisible current across the Seraite. It flowed like a river of ethereal light, converging on the quarantine zone and sinking into the crystal. The agent watched, his hand trembling as he keyed his report. The crystalline structure began to glow, its slow, steady heartbeat accelerating. The light within it was no longer faint. It was a brilliant, hungry, violet fire. It was feeding. It had consumed the ghost of celestial law, and it was growing stronger. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A King's Gambit. The aftermath of Metatron's first strike was a fragile, deceptive quiet. In the restored infirmary, the hum of healing Keto was a comforting sound, but it couldn't erase the memory of its absence. The Gote 13 went about their duties with a new, grim efficiency, the ever-present threat of a conceptual enemy sharpening their senses. But in Naruto's quarters, the silence was different. It was a space of shared recovery, a quiet intimacy forged in the crucible of his sacrifice. Yoruichi was sprawled across a pile of cushions on the floor, ostensibly reading a scroll but streetly watching Naruto from under her lashes. Soifon stood by the shoji screen overlooking a small, enclosed garden, her posture still disciplined but no longer radiating the rigid hostility of before. She was watchful, but her vigilance now felt protective, not accusatory. Naruto himself sat by a low table, a cup of untouched tea cooling before him. He wasn't meditating, but his focus was turned inward, sensing the subtle flows of energy throughout the Seraite, feeling for the next inevitable attack. "It's too quiet," Yoruichi finally said, breaking the silence. "Bullies and gods have one thing in common. They hate being proven wrong. Metatron isn't just going to pack up its geometric shapes and go home. It is assessing," Soifon added, her gaze fixed on the garden's unmoving koi pond. Quote, "Our response to the first seal was illogical. It is recalculating. The next attack will be adapted to counter your method." She didn't have to say what the method was. The memory of him offering high MSELF to the seal was burned into both of their minds. A repeat performance might not be possible, and even if it were, they wouldn't allow it. Naruto finally looked up, his single blue eye holding a clarity that was as sharp and unnerving as a shard of glass. "That's why we can't wait for the next attack." Yoruichi sat up, her interest piqued. "What are you suggesting? We can't build a fortress against an idea." "No," Naruto agreed. "So we stop fighting on his terms. We stop defending our reality and we take the war to his." He stood up, the simple motion carrying a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. "Metatron attacked our concepts of healing and power. What's next? Gravity, causality, the bonds that hold matter together. We can't spend the rest of eternity plugging holes in the dam of reality. We're going to its realm. We are going to find the source of the seals, and we are going to break it. The declaration landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. It was audacious, insane. It was a plan born of the kind of absolute confidence that bordered on madness. Go to its realm. Yoruichi was on her feet, her playful demeanor gone, replaced by disbelief. We don't even know what that is. Is it a place, a dimension, a state of mind? You're talking about invading a metaphor. Then we will find a way to make the metaphor bleed, Naruto stated, his voice devoid of doubt. I felt it when I broke the seal. Its energy has a frequency, a signature. If something has a signature, it has a location. And if it has a location, we can get to it. The 12th D. Vision Research and Development Institute was, on a good day, a symphony of controlled chaos. Today, it was a maelstrom. At Naruto's request, two of the most brilliant, and unstable, minds in the Soul S. Oshite had been forced into a reluctant and volatile collaboration. Urahara Kazuki, in his usual green robes and striped hat, fanned himself as he examined a complex energy matrix projected in the air. The theoretical framework is fascinating. He chirped, his eyes gleaming with academic excitement. Think of it not as a place, but as a conceptual harmonic. A dimension defined not by space and time, but by a set of absolute, unchangeable laws. To travel there, we don't need a door. We need a tuning fork. Across the lab, Mayuri Kuretsuchi sneered, his painted face a mask of contempt. Spare me your whimsical analogies, shopkeeper. Your tuning fork requires a catastrophic expenditure of energy. The sheer ratio required to breach a dimension of pure law is staggering. He gestured to a massive, skeletal apparatus being assembled in the center of the lab, a grotesque fusion of wires, crystals, and what looked disturbingly like organic matter. This gateway will not be tuned. It will be a brute force assault on the very foundations of dimensional theory. We will be punching a hole in reality with our bare fists. Ah, but a precise punch. Urahara countered cheerfully. One aimed at just the right spot. Naruto stood between them, a calm anchor in their sea of intellectual vanity. Can it be done? Mayuri let out a dry, rasping laugh. Oh, it can be done. Perfection is always possible, for a genius such as myself. But it will have a price. He turned, his unnervingly golden eyes fixing on Naruto. To generate the required power, we will have to tap directly into the Seir Ite's core spiritual network, the same network that sustains the Shikanmaku barrier and powers the city's primary defenses. For the duration that the gateway is open, those systems will be compromised. The unspoken threat was clear. He was proposing they lower the Soul Society's shield, leaving it vulnerable, exposed. It was the moral compromise Naruto had known was coming. To protect everyone, he would have to endanger them all. The capital drain will be immense, Urahara added, his tone suddenly serious. We would be drawing power from the very soul of this city. Lights will fail. Barriers will thin. It will be like a citywide brownout of spiritual energy. The Gote 13 will have to be on high alert. Any stray hollows, any opportunists, it would be the perfect time to strike. How long? Naruto asked, his face unreadable. Minutes, Mayuri answered. Perhaps 10, if we push it. Any longer, and the damage to the network could become permanent. The city's spiritual veins would collapse. 10 minutes. A 10-minute window of catastrophic vulnerability to launch a preemptive strike against a god. It was a king's gambit, a desperate, all-or-nothing throw of the dice. Do it, Naruto said without hesitation. Begin at once. The emergency captain's meeting was tense. Naruto stood before the assembled leaders of the Gote 13 and laid out the plan in stark, unambiguous terms. He did not ask for their opinions or their votes. He informed them of his decision, and of the role each of them would play. The reaction was a mixture of stunned silence and outright protest. D deliberately weakened the Serite's defenses. Hitsugaya demanded, his youthful face incredulous. After we were just invaded. That is strategically unsound. It is a risk I am willing to take, Naruto countered, his gaze steady. The alternative is to wait for an enemy who can turn off our swords and our medicine at will. We cannot win a defensive war. Our only move is to attack. Byakuya Kuchiki. who had remained silent and observant since his realignment, finally spoke. His voice was cold, but it lacked its previous oppositional fire. The risk is not yours alone to take, Uzumaki Dono. You are risking every soul in this city. What contingencies have you put in place for the defense of the Seraite during this window of vulnerability? It was a fair question, and one Naruto was prepared for. Captain Soifon and the Onmitsukido will coordinate the defense. Every division will be on high alert, deployed to pre-arranged strategic locations to counter any potential breach. We will be vulnerable, but we will not be unprepared. All eyes turned to Soifon. She stepped forward, her expression resolute. My division has drafted a full-spectrum defensive protocol. Every known vector of attack has been accounted for. It is a high-risk scenario, but it is manageable. Her unqualified support for the plan sent a ripple of surprise through the room. The Gote 13's most ardent Tradit Yonalist was endorsing its most radical maneuver. Kiraku, who had been listening from his seat, tipped his hat back. He looked at Naruto, at the unwavering certainty in his eye, and at the united front presented by Yoruichi and Soifon. He saw a man who was willing to bear the full weight of an impossible choice. He's right, the captain commander said, his voice silencing the remaining murmurs. We can't sit here and wait for the sky to fall. We've been given a weapon the likes of which we've never had. He gestured toward Naruto. It's time we used him as one. His gaze swept the room. You have your orders. Prepare your divisions. The king is going to war. The meeting was over. The Gote 13, unified by a mixture of trust, fear, and the lack of any better option, began to prepare for the gambit. That night, Naruto stood on a high balcony overlooking the Seraite. The city below was a sea of soft lights, a fragile bastion of order in a universe that was proving to be anything but. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. The lives of millions rested on his ability to win a battle in a place that might not even be real. Two flickers of shunpo, one silent and one with a faint whisper of air, announced their arrival. Yoruichi and Soifon appeared on the balcony behind him. This is a suicide mission, Yoruichi said, her voice sharp, devoid of any playfulness. You're going alone into the heart of an enemy's power, to a place we know nothing about. It's reckless. It is an unacceptable risk, Soifon agreed, her voice equally firm. She stood at his other side, her arms crossed. You are the Soul King. The pillar of the three worlds. To risk yourself in this manner is to risk everything. You are leaving your throne undefended. He had expected this. He turned to face them. The moonlight catching the bone white of his mask. That's why I have to go alone. The risk is too great to ask anyone else to share it. This is my burden. It was his attempt to protect them. To shield them from the most dangerous part of his war. Yoruichi actually laughed, a short, sharp, angry sound. Burden. Do you think we are just decorations for your throne? Do you think after everything we've seen, everything we've fought for, that we would let you go off and play the martyr by yourself? She stepped forward, jabbing a finger into his chest. I am the fastest being in the Soul Society. If you need to get in or out of somewhere quickly, you need me. Leaving me behind is not protecting me, it's being stupid. Before he could respond, Soifon spoke, her voice quieter but burning with a newfound, unshakable conviction. She is correct. From a purely tactical standpoint, you are compromised when you are alone. She met his gaze, her dark eyes intense. Logos tried to defeat you by proving your attachments were a logical flaw. You defeated it by proving they were your greatest strength. That paradox you embody, the one that shattered the first seal, it is not something you possess on your own. It is a power that is defined by your connection to us. To go alone is to go without your sharpest weapon. You would be a warrior leaving his heart behind. Her words struck him harder than any physical blow. She had used his own logic, his own confession, and turned it into an irrefutable strategic argument. She wasn't just appealing to emotion, she was telling him that he was weaker without them. That they were not liabilities to be protected, but essential components of his power. He looked from Yoruichi's fiery, defiant face to Soifon's cool, resolute one. He saw not subordinates or followers. He saw partners, equals. We are not asking for permission, Soifon stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. We are telling you how it's going to be, Yoruichi finished, her grin finally returning. Fierce and brilliant, The king doesn't go to war without his queens. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face, a genuine expression of warmth and relief. The weight on his shoulders didn't vanish, but it suddenly felt manageable. He was not alone. He would never be alone again. "All right," he said, his voice filled with a power that had nothing to do with being a god. "We go together." In the deepest, darkest forests of Hueco Mundo, a lone Vasto lord, a creature of immense power and millennia of solitary instinct, paused in its endless hunt. It was a sleek, panther-like hollow, its power second only to the Espada of old, but it felt a change in the static air, a new hum that resonated with the cold emptiness inside it. It looked down at its own claws, the hardened extensions of its spiritual body. For a fleeting, impossible moment, a faint, hexagonal pattern of cold, blue light shimmered across their surface. It was the same geometric signature of Metatron's seal. The hollow did not understand what it was seeing, but it felt a new kind of power flowing into it. Not the hot, raging power of its own hunger, but a cold, precise, and utterly alien strength. A sense of ordered, malevolent purpose. The whispering void was not just growing. It was learning from its new celestial neighbor. It was adapting. Back in the 12th Division labs, the final preparations were complete. The gateway stood in the center of the chamber, a massive ring of interlocking black metal and pulsing crystal. It was currently inert, silent, but the air around it thrummed with contained power. All across the Seraite, non-essential systems were going dark. The great Shikanmaku barrier flickered, its incandescent glow dimming to a fragile shimmer. The time had come. Naruto, Yoruichi, and Soifon stood before the device, clad in their battle attire. Behind them, Urahara and Mayuri manned a complex console. "The gateway is primed," Mayuri announced, a flick of something that might have been professional excitement in his eyes. "Once we open it, the clock starts. 10 minutes. Then it will collapse, with or without you." Naruto nodded. He looked at the two women at his side. Yoruichi gave him a confident nod. Soifon met his gaze and, for the first time, gave a small, sharp, and utterly determined nod of her own. They were ready. "Do it," Naruto commanded. Urahara tipped his hat. "Well then," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's go punch a hole in God's house." He flipped a switch. Power surged. The ring roared to life, and the space within it did not open. It shattered, revealing a swirling, chaotic vortex of impossible colors and pure, unadulterated law. The gambit had begun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Realm of Absolute Law. Stepping through the gateway was like diving into an ocean of frozen silence. All sensation was simultaneously stripped away and overwhelmed. There was no air, yet they could breathe. There was no ground, yet they were standing. There was no light, yet they could see. The world they had entered was not a physical place, but a living equation, and their very existence was a variable that didn't belong. They stood on an invisible plane within an endless, three-dimensional lattice of crystalline light. Geometric shapes, cubes, dodecahedrons, and forms with too many sides to comprehend, drifted through the void in perfect, predictable orbits. Pulsating lines of pure information, like ethereal circuit boards, connected everything, humming with a silent, harmonious resonance that grated on the soul. It was a realm of pure, unadulterated thought, beautiful in its perfection and utterly suffocating. "My Shunpo," Yoruichi breathed, her voice sounding flat and strange in the non-air. She tried a simple flicker, a movement that was as natural to her as breathing. Her body tensed, but she didn't move. "It feels heavy, like the concept of unnecessary movement is fighting me." Soifon held her Zanpakuto, its familiar weight a cold comfort. But she could feel the realm pressing in on her, too. Her mind, which thrived on order and discipline, was being overwhelmed by this sterile, absolute version of it. This wasn't the satisfying order of a well-executed plan, it was the crushing order of a prison where free will was a grammatical error. "This entire dimension is a Kido spell," she murmured, her strategic mind trying to dissect the threat, one that enforces its own rules on everything within it. Naruto felt it most acutely. His soul, that volatile fusion of life and death, was anathema here. The realm itself seemed to recoil from him, the lines of light dimming in his immediate vicinity as if shying away from a contagion. "It's a sterile environment," he said, his voice a low growl. And we're the bacteria. Quote, they didn't have to wait long for the immune system to arrive. From the glowing lines of the lattice, shapes began to coalesce. They were not creatures of flesh or spirit, but constructs of pure law, taking the form of elegant, multifaceted crystalline humanoids. Their limbs were sharp angles of light, their bodies flawless prisms. They had no faces, no eyes, only the cold, unwavering glow of pure logic. The antibodies. They moved in perfect unison, their advance not a charge but a recalibration of space. Their harmonious hum intensified, a chilling chorus that wasn't a sound, but a direct imposition of thought. Anomaly detected. Foreign logic introduced. Correction commencing. One of the antibodies raised an arm, and a beam of pure white light shot toward Yoruichi. It didn't burn with heat or concussive force. It was a beam of pure information. Yoruichi, relying on a lifetime of instinct, tried to dodge. But for a horrifying split second, her body didn't respond. The concept of dodging, a chaotic, unpredictable act, had been temporarily suspended in her personal space. Naruto moved, a blur of motion that seemed to tear at the fabric of the logical realm around him. He threw himself in front of her, not to block the beam, but to corrupt it. He met it with his own raw, paradoxical energy. The beam of pure law struck his chaotic soul and fractured, dissolving into a shower of harmless, glitching data. Don't fight them with our rules, he grunted, pushing Yoruichi back. They'll just turn them off. We have to use their rules against them. And how do we do that? Soifon demanded, as three more antibodies advanced, their crystalline forms gliding through the non-space. We can't cut a concept, Naruto said, his mind racing. So we don't try. Soifon, your strikes are precise, perfect. Use your blade not to sever them, but to define a boundary. Impose a new, arbitrary rule on the space between you and them. A line that cannot be crossed. It was a completely alien way of thinking about combat, but Soifon, in her desperation, understood. As an antibody approached, she didn't swing to kill. She performed a perfect, swift kata, her blade tracing a razor-thin line in the space before her. For an instant, a line of blackness, a crack in the logic of the realm, appeared. The antibody, moving along its flawless, predetermined path, crossed the line and simply ceased. Its logic had encountered a new, contradictory axiom: this space cannot be crossed, and it had been nullified by the paradox. Yoruichi, Naruto snapped, turning to her. Stop trying to be fast. Just be unpredictable. Don't think about where you're going. Let your instincts move you. Your chaos is a weapon here. Create errors in their perfect system. Yoruichi's eyes lit up with a feral grin. No plan, no strategy, just pure, unadulterated impulse. It was the most fun she'd had all day. She stopped trying to force her shunpo and instead just moved. She cartwheeled through the void, backflipped over a beam of logic, and scuttled across a plane of light like a spider. Her movements were pointless, random, and utterly illogical. And they were driving the antibodies insane. Beams fired at where she was, only for her to be somewhere else entirely, her erratic path creating a cascade of targeting errors that made the constructs glitch and stutter. Naruto became the anchor. He stood at the center of their maelstrom, his own soul acting as the primary infection. He didn't throw punches or fire energy blasts. He projected his own flawed, contradictory nature outward. He pulsed with the concepts of selfish love, of necessary sacrifice, of life and death in one body. The area around him became a dead zone for logic, a bubble of pure paradox where the antibodies, perfect forms, would warp and decay if they got too close. They were no longer fighting a battle. They were a virus, and they were spreading. As the last of the lesser antibodies dissolved into static, the entire realm seemed to shudder. The harmonious hum dropped an octave, becoming a low, ominous thrum of focused power. The light from the infinite lattice began to drain, flowing from every direction toward a single point in the center of the void. The antibodies they had defeated were just the first wave, the scouting party. Now, the realm was focusing its full attention. Light and law compressed, folding in on itself with impossible geometry until it formed a new being. It was colossal, a towering figure that seemed to wear the very fabric of the dimension as its skin. It was humanoid but had dozens of crystalline wings that were constantly silently rearranging themselves into new, perfect patterns. Its face was a single, massive, multifaceted gemstone that shone with the cold, white light of a dying star. This was not a servitor. This was a direct manifestation. Metatron's avatar. Your existence is a wound. It broadcast into their minds, its voice, the weight of a universe's certainty. A flaw in the grand design. We are the cure. Its hand, a construct of 1,000 interlocking crystals, rose and pointed at Soifon. Soul designation. Soifon. Core axiom. Loyalty. Flawed by illogical emotional attachment to designated anomaly Yoruichi Soifon. Correction. The memory of her abandonment of her post, the source of your pain and your flawed attachment, is an unnecessary data point. Let me remove it for you. You will be purer, more orderly. A beam of light, thicker and more potent than any before, shot toward Soifon. It wasn't an attack, it was an offer, an act of psychic surgery. Yoruichi screamed her name, but Soifon stood her ground, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fury. This thing wasn't trying to kill her, it was trying to edit her, to raise the very pain that had forged her into who she was. My flaws are my own, she roared, and poured every ounce of her will, her rage, and her defiant, illogical loyalty into her blade. She didn't create a boundary this time. She met the beam head-on, her sword glowing with the dark, concentrated energy of her spirit. The beam of logic hit her blade and, for a moment, held. Then it shattered, deflected by the sheer, stubborn force of her refusal to be changed. The avatar seemed to pause, as if it could not comprehend a flaw that wished to remain flawed. And in that pause, Naruto saw their chance. Now, he yelled. The heart of it. We have to plant the seed. The frantic voice of Urahara crackled into their minds, transmitted across dimensions by some impossible Kido. Naruto-san. The gateway is destabilizing. Mayuri says the energy drain is causing a cascade failure. You have 3 minutes before it collapses permanently. There was no time for a plan. There was only instinct, trust, and a single, desperate, all or nothing charge. Soifon, on me, Yoruichi yelled, her body already wreathed in the high-density reishi of her own forbidden technique. Shunko, lightning, a raw, aotic element that had no place in this perfect realm, exploded around Yoruichi. She didn't use it to attack. She used it to create a zone of pure, untamed chaos. She became a comet, streaking toward the avatar. The avatar shifted its attention, raising both hands to defend against the most immediate threat, its perfect mind calculating 1,000 ways to nullify her chaotic energy. But it was a feint. A brilliant, suicidal, and utterly illogical feint. Your turn, little B. Yoruichi screamed as she veered off at the last second. Soifon was right behind her, moving in her slipstream. The avenue. Ader's defenses were focused on Yoruichi's wild attack, leaving it open for a fraction of a second. It was the opening of a master assassin's dreams. Soifon's body became a blur, her movements economical and perfect. She was a living embodiment of her Shikai's principle, a single, perfect strike aimed at the exact same point twice. But she wasn't aiming to kill. She struck the avatar's chest, right where a heart would be. With the hilt of her sword. A sharp, precise blow that did no physical damage. Then, with a speed that almost defied reality, she struck the exact same spot again. Naigeki Kesatsu. 2 steps to define a target. She had marked it. She had created a conceptual bullseye on the god's chest. Naruto. She screamed, her part of the plan complete. Naruto was already there. He had used their charge as his cover. He appeared before the avatar, right at the point Soifon had marked. He drew all of his power inward, not into a massive, explosive attack, but into a single, infinitely dense point in the palm of his hand. It was not a ball of energy. It was a singularity, a perfect, tiny sphere containing the ultimate contradiction, his own soul. The life of the sage, the finality of the Shinigami. The selfish love for his friends, the selfless will to protect his world. It was the illogical axiom that had shattered the first seal, concentrated into a single, conceptual bullet. He thrust his hand forward and slammed it against the marked spot on the avatar's chest. A flaw in the design. He roared, pushing all of himself into the attack. Then choke on it. There was no explosion, no flash of light. The avatar's crystalline body didn't even crack. But at the point of impact, in the very center of its perfect, glowing core, a tiny black spot appeared. A spot of pure, unadulterated chaos. A flaw, a seed. The avatar froze. Its light flickered violently. The harmonious hum became a horrifying, discordant shriek of failing logic. Error. Error. Paradox detected in core. E-programming. Cannot resolve. Cannot delete. The seed of chaos began to spread, not like a fire, but like a corruption, black veins of illogical reality branching out through the avatar's body of pure law. It was trying to correct itself. But every attempt to apply its flawless logic to the seed of illogic only fed it, causing the corruption to spread faster. It's working. Urahara's voice screamed in their heads. But the whole dimension is coming apart. 1 minute. Get out now. The perfect lattice of the realm was shattering. Crystalline structures collapsed into storms of glitching data. Beams of raw, uncontrolled law fired randomly through the void. They had not killed the god. They had given it a fatal disease. Naruto grabbed Yoruichi and Soifon, pulling them back. Time to go. They fled, dodging collapsing concepts and blasts of pure math, the shrieking, glitching avatar writhing in its death throes behind them. They could see the gateway, a swirling vortex of familiar chaos, now flickering and unstable. They leapt through it, the sensation like being torn apart and stitched back together in an instant. They tumbled out onto the cold, hard floor of the 12th Division lab, landing in a heap of exhausted, battered limbs. Behind them, the massive metal ring of the gateway groaned, glowed white-hot, and then, with a deafening implosion that shattered every piece of glass in the lab, it collapsed into a twisted, smoking ruin. They were back. Battered, drained, but they were back. They had done it. They had faced a god in its own heaven and given it a taste of mortality. Far across the Seraite, in the desolate, quarantined 80th district, the backlash of the gateway's collapse arrived. It was not a physical shockwave, but a tidal wave of distorted, chaotic energy, a fusion of Naruto's paradox, Yoruichi's chaos, Soifon's will, and the corrupted law of Metatron's dying realm. It was an energy unlike any other, a poison to both order and chaos. The wave washed over the pulsing crystalline structure. The structure did not shatter. It did not resist. It absorbed it. It drank the torrent of paradoxical energy greedily. The lone Onmitsukido agent watching from his hidden post could only stare in horror. The slow, steady pulse of light within the crystal stopped. For a terrifying moment, it went completely dark. Then, it flared to life, the violet light inside now burning with a fierce, complex, and undeniable intelligence. The slow, steady pulse did not return. It was replaced by something new. A rapid, steady, powerful beat. The sound of a monstrous, alien heart, now fully awake. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Corrupted God and the Rising Shadow. The air in the 12th Division lab tasted of ozone and burnt reality. For a long, ragged moment, the only sound was the trio's harsh, synchronized breathing on the floor, the metallic tang of blood, and the hiss of cooling, twisted metal from the gateway's wreckage. Urahara fanned himself with his hat, a nervous, rapid gesture that did nothing to hide the profound relief in his eyes. Mayuri, for his part, was staring at the ruined gateway with an expression of almost religious awe. Magnificent, the captain of the 12th whispered, a manic glee in his voice. The energy backlash, the dimensional shearing, the data is exquisite. It was a perfect, beautiful failure. They're alive, you madman, Yoruichi coughed, pushing herself up on one elbow. I'd call that a resounding success. She looked at Naruto, then at Soifon, a quick, silent check in that passed between them in an instant. They were battered. Their spiritual energy was scraped raw, but they were whole. They had done the impossible. But their victory was a fragile, fleeting thing. Even as they staggered to their feet, the first alarms began to chime across the Seraite. Not the piercing wail of a hollow invasion, but a series of discordant, strange alerts they had never heard before. A communications officer, his face pale and sweating, ran into the lab. Skidding to a halt. Report from the 10th Division. The Sokyoku Hill, its geometry has inverted. The ground is now the sky. And the river flowing through the Seraite is running backward. Another report followed immediately, this one from the 8th Division. Unidentified phenomenon in the West District. The sky has turned to television static. We are experiencing random, localized gravitational shifts. Metatron was not dead. The seed of chaos they had planted in its core had not killed it. It had driven it insane. The god of pure law, now infected with a paradox it could not resolve, was lashing out. It wasn't attacking with focused seals anymore, it was having a cosmic seizure. The fundamental laws of reality within the Soul Society were glitching, flickering like a faulty light bulb. It was a chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifying assault. Naruto's head snapped up, his exhaustion forgotten. This was his fault. His victory had unleashed a new kind of hell. Kiraku, I need a full status report, now. He projected, his voice resonating directly in the Captain Commander's mind. We're already on it. Kiraku's thoughts shot back, laced with a new, frantic urgency. It's everywhere. Random, nonsensical events. It's like the whole world is having a stroke. As the captain scrambled to deal with the surreal, reality-bending chaos, a new report came in. It was a single, terrified voice from the Onmitsukido surveillance post on the edge of the Rukongai's 80th district. And it cut through all the other noise like a blade of ice. Commander Soifon, it's awake. The structure, oh, gods, it's moving. Soifon went rigid, her blood running cold. She didn't need to ask for details. She could feel it. A new presence had just announced itself on the spiritual plane. It was not the chaotic, frenzied energy of the mad god. It was a cold, silent, and infinitely hungry void. The view from the top of the 1st Division barracks was apocalyptic. In one direction, the sky flickered with patches of static and impossible colors, a testament to Metatron's ongoing breakdown. Buildings bent at unnatural angles, and the very air seemed to shimmer with uncertainty. But in the other direction, toward the Rukongai, was a horror of a different kind. A creeping, silent tide of absolute nothingness was advancing from the 80th district. It was not a wave of fire or darkness. It was a wave of erasure. Everything it touched, the ramshackle buildings, the barren ground, the very air, was unmade, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, featureless, slate-gray plain. There was no sound, no debris, no dust, just a calm, inexorable consumption of reality itself. Souls caught in its path did not scream. They simply ceased to be. Their light, their Raryoku, the very existence snuffed out in an instant. The whispering void, gorged on the paradoxical energy of the gateway's collapse, had finally awoken. It was not a creature to be fought. It was a metaphysical cancer. And it was devouring their world. The Gote 13 was caught between two apocalypses. A mad god throwing a tantrum from another dimension, and a primordial nothingness eating their reality from the inside out. They were fighting a war on two fronts, against enemies they couldn't possibly comprehend. The Emergency War Council was a frantic, desperate affair. Captains shouted reports of chaos, of districts being unmade, of Shinigami driven mad by the flickering laws of physics. Panic, for the first time, was beginning to set in. Naruto slammed his hand on the central table, the resultant G-shockwave of spiritual pressure silencing the room instantly. Enough, he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. His single blue eye burned with a fire that seemed to hold the chaos at bay. Panic is a luxury we cannot afford. This is not a debate. This is the battle. He turned to a projection of the Seraite, one side flickering with random warning symbols, the other showing a steadily advancing gray line. These are two different types of threats, he stated, his mind moving with a speed and clarity that cut through the fear. Metatron's attacks are chaotic, unpredictable, but they are not absolute. They are glitches, temporary tears in the fabric. The void, however, is a permanent erasure. Holding the line against the void is our first priority. If we lose the ground, it is gone forever. Byakuya Kuchiki, his face a mask of grim determination, stepped forward. My division, along with the 10th and 13th, can establish a defensive perimeter. We can use large-scale Kido to try and slow its advance. It will consume the Kido, Naruto countered. It doesn't fight energy, it unmakes it. We can't stop it with walls. We can only hold the line with pure, unyielding will. His gaze swept the room and settled on Soifon. He didn't have to say a word. She understood. The Onmitsukido, the 2nd, and the 6th divisions will form the vanguard, she declared, her voice hard as steel. She was no longer the conflicted, uncertain woman she had been. She was a commander facing the end of the world. We will not build a wall. We will be the wall. We will hold that line until we are unmade ourselves. It was a suicide mission, and every captain in the room knew it. To stand before that tide of nothingness was to accept one's own erasure. But Soifon's unwavering resolve was infectious. Byakuya nodded his assent. The line had to be held. That leaves the mad god, Kiraku said, his tone grim. How do we fight an enemy who can turn the sky into soup? Naruto looked to Yoruichi. Metatron is throwing chaos at us. We throw chaos back. A slow, dangerous grin spread across Yoruichi's face. The mad god is throwing a tantrum of pure chaos. Sounds like my kind of party. She understood her role perfectly. While Soifon represented the unyielding order needed to hold the line against the void, she was the untamed, unpredictable force needed to counter Metatron's erratic assault. She would not try to defend against the glitches, she would dance between them, a chaotic agent of her own, striking at the dimensional weak points, keeping the god off balance. The plan was set. It was a desperate, impossible strategy. They would split their strongest forces to fight two separate, god-level threats simultaneously. The rest of you, Naruto commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Will handle the fallout, rescue civilians, maintain what order you can. Kenpachi, he looked to the grinning giant, your disaster relief. Find the biggest, ugliest thing that reality spits out, and kill it. Finally, Kenpachi growled, his hand gripping his sword. A job I can understand. The strategy was in place. The roles were assigned, but there was one final question. And you? Kiraku asked, looking at Naruto. Which front will you take? Naruto looked at the map, at the two encroaching apocalypses. He could not be in two places at once. But he was the sole king. He was the pillar. Neither, he said, and the entire room went silent. Yoruichi is the spear that will strike at the heavens. Soifon is the shield that will hold back the abyss. He placed his hand on the center of the map, on the very heart of the Seraite. I will be the hand that wields them both. He would not join a single front. He would become the anchor for the entire realm. He would pour his own immense spiritual energy into the foundations of the Soul Society, using his own paradoxical nature to stabilize reality, to fight off the worst of Metatron's glitches and to reinforce the very ground that Soifon's army stood upon. He would be the central command, the fulcrum upon which the fate of the war would turn. It was a role only he could fill, and it would drain him completely. As the captains flashed away to rally their forces, the three of them stood alone for a final moment. The weight of what they were about to do settled upon them. They were the last line of defense for all of existence. Don't get yourself erased, Soi-chan, Yoruichi said, her voice soft, the teasing nickname now holding a universe of meaning. I'd have to get all sentimental, and it would be very unbecoming. Try not to break reality more than it already is, Soifon retorted, a faint, ghost of a smile touching her lips. I will have enough to repair as it is. They both looked to Naruto. He met their gazes, his single blue eye holding a universe of trust and a terrible, aching fear for them both. He said nothing. He simply reached out and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. He poured a small, infinitesimally small, piece of his own soul into them, a single, golden spark that settled deep within their spirits. It wasn't a power-up. It was a connection, a lifeline, a way for them to feel his presence. To know they were not alone, even when they were worlds apart. No matter what happens, he said, his voice a low, solemn vow. I am with you. Yoruichi's grin became genuine, a flash of brilliant light in the growing dark. Soifon's eyes, for the first time, softened with an emotion she could no longer deny. She gave a single, sharp nod. And then they were gone. Yoruichi became a streak of golden lightning, rocketing toward the flickering, static-filled sky, a defiant laugh echoing in her wake as she charged headlong into the heart of a mad god's storm. Soifon appeared at the edge of the Rukongai. Before the silent, advancing tide of gray nothingness. Before her stood the combined, terrified forces of three divisions. She drew her Zanpakuto, its blade gleaming in the dying light. Hold the line, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that was absolute, a shield against the coming end. And in the highest chamber of the 1st Division barracks, Naruto sat on the floor, crossing his legs. He closed his eye and reached out, not with his hands, but with his very being. He became the pillar. He plunged his consciousness into the foundations of the Seraite. His power a golden bulwark against the chaos from above and the nothingness from below. The final battle had begun. The spear was thrown. The shield was raised. And the king stood watch over all. Chapter 9 End.